TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Today we're joined by a true legend in the sport of professional wrestling, the king of wrestling, Jerry Lawler. You've wrestled everyone from like A to Z, and in my opinion, probably one of the best talkers in the business. And you started up almost everybody in the business, went through Memphis territory, and you're responsible for a lot of the guys in the business today making it to the top. And I guess before we get into today's version of Jerry Lawler, I want to talk about how you got started in the business.
I have to try to think back now how many years ago. It's, I guess, nearly going on 30 years ago. I was a wrestling fan to start off with. I think the first time I can remember actually seeing wrestling on television, my family lived. Of course, I was born and raised most of my life in Memphis, Tennessee. My father worked in Memphis at a big Ford Motor Company assembly plant. And I think in about 1958 or something like that, they had a problem with the city. The Ford Motor Company had a problem with the city. And so they shut this assembly plant down that my father worked at. And they built another plant in Lorain, Ohio, and which was like 800 miles from Memphis. And they gave everybody that worked at the plant in Memphis the opportunity to transfer to Ohio and keep their jobs. And so our family wound up packing up and moving up to the shores of Lake Erie, about 30 miles west of Cleveland. And we moved there right in the middle of winter. The Lake Erie, I will never forget, Lake Erie was frozen over, and there were several hundred families moving into this little area because of this new plant opening up. And so there was a very big housing shortage. So we had to move into a little lakefront cottage that was actually usually only in the summertime ordinarily for people that wanted to rent these little cottages and be right on the shores of Lake Erie. And we moved there in something like February of '58, and the whole lake was frozen over, and the wind was coming in, and these little cottages didn't even have heaters because they were ordinarily just used in the summertime. So we moved right into there, and it was like quite a culture shock coming from Memphis. But that was the first time that I remember seeing wrestling on television. I'm sure we had wrestling on television in Memphis before that, but I don't recall ever seeing it. But when we moved to Ohio, I saw a wrestling show there that featured the Sheik, Bobo Brazil, John and Chris Tolis, and all of these, and Johnny Powers, some guys from the Cleveland and Detroit area. And so that's where I really first started to watch wrestling on television and enjoyed it. And my father was a big wrestling fan also. We wound up living in Cleveland for about 7 years, and a lot of people wonder why a lot of people that know me today know that I have been a big Cleveland sports fan all my life, and that's really the reason. We moved from Memphis, where they had no professional sports teams at the time, to just like I said, 30 miles away from Cleveland. And there were, of course, the Cleveland Indians and the Cleveland Browns, and I got my first opportunity to go to a professional baseball game or professional football games. And this was the time when Jim Brown was playing, and the Cleveland Browns were winning championships. And then when we moved back to Memphis, there were still no pro sports teams there. So I remained a Cleveland Browns and Cleveland Indians fan my whole life, really. And still am to this day. And fortunately, through wrestling, I've gotten the opportunity to meet a lot of the players and a lot of the owners and that sort of thing. So it's been a neat sort of love affair with the Cleveland sports scene. But as I said, we stayed there for about 7, almost 8 years in Ohio. And then my father had a heart attack and a heart condition, so we wound up disabled to work from there. And we moved back to Memphis. And then when we came back to Memphis, I was just in high school, and I remember that's the first time I remember seeing wrestling on Memphis television. And it, of course, was on Channel 13, and there was Lance Russell and Dave Brown doing the commentary, and of course all different wrestlers. And I guess that was the first time I realized that wrestling was regionalized, so to speak, because I would talk to the other kids about the wrestlers that I'd seen in Ohio, like the Sheik and Bobo Brazil and these guys, and the people in Memphis had never heard of them because it was just the television at that time was regionalized. They knew people like Jackie Fargo and Tojo Yamamoto and Don and Al Green and the Von Brauners and the guys that were the local, I guess the regional stars there in the Memphis area. So I of course got into watching the wrestling there every Saturday morning in Memphis, and Memphis was unique in the fact that at that time they had a live wrestling show every Monday night in Memphis at a downtown auditorium called Ellis Auditorium. And so my father, as I said, was disabled and didn't work, and I was in high school and just had like a learner's permit to drive. So every Monday night I would drive my dad, and he and I would go down to the wrestling matches there in Memphis, and that was my first actually seeing a live event, and I was like hooked then. I was just like I was a big fan, and I remember, I don't know why, but I guess they were just more, at least to me, seemed like more charismatic or more risk taking. But I was, as a lot of people are, I was a fan of the bad guys. I was a big the top heel team at the time was a team called the Blue Infernos. And I learned later that they consisted of a guy named Frank Martinez, a couple of Mexican wrestlers, Frank Martinez, and the other guy escapes me, except that he still wrestles now to this day. Oh, gosh. It'll come to me later. But anyway, these guys flying all over the ring, and I just, for some reason, I thought, I guess maybe the mystery of the mask. And this was back in the era that mask guys, it was really neat because nobody really knew their identity. There wasn't an internet where everybody would find out all of the scoops about everybody. These mask guys were really mysterious, and I remember, like, after the matches or whatever, hang out and try to see these guys without their mask or coming into the auditoriums and that sort of thing. But anyway, then I guess like a lot of people do these days, I guess now they actually call them something, backyard federations or whatever, that sort of thing. But at that time, we lived in Memphis there, where I had a brother that was that's 4 years older than me. And then next door to my brother and I, or next door to our house, there were a group of boys called the Mike, Danny, David, Dickie Mashburn, 4 brothers. And so we all, there were like 6 of us there, and we all wrestled around. And Mike and I especially, we wound up really imitating everything that we saw on television and saw these wrestlers do. And, right in the backyard, body slamming each other on the ground and this sort of thing. And we just thought it was neat. We just enjoyed the wrestling and enjoyed emulating the guys that we saw and trying to do everything that we saw them do on television. But the way that I finally got to actually meet a professional wrestler for the first time was through my artwork. And a lot of people may or may not know that I do artwork and have been able to draw ever since I can remember. And one of the things I started doing at the matches, I would draw these cartoons or caricatures of the wrestlers and spend a lot of my time, actually too much time when I should have been doing schoolwork. I would be drawing wrestlers and that sort of thing. And I took some of the drawings to the matches on Monday night and let the other fans around there see my little caricatures. And maybe I'd draw Jackie Fargo body slamming Tojo Yamamoto right through the ring, and coming out the bottom of the floor of the ring and that sort of stuff. And there was an old man and lady that, of course, long since passed away now, but they just were really nice. And they the man, for some reason, I had never even thought of it. The man said, "You ought to send some of those drawings to Lance Russell over at Channel 13 and see what they think about it." So I thought, well, it couldn't hurt anything. So I did that. The following week, I put together 6 or 7 little drawings of what had taken place at the matches in Memphis the previous week. Sent them to Channel 13. Attention, Lance Russell. I don't even know what I expected. I didn't necessarily expect to hear from anybody on the thing. But the following Saturday morning, I turned on the television, 11 o'clock, sit down to watch the show, and I looked, and I could see, as Lance and Dave came on the screen, they're talking about who was going to wrestle that day. I could see on the corner of his desk, I could see my pictures were sitting there, my drawings. And I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. My drawings are on the desk. They're going to show my drawings. And sure enough, about 30 minutes into the show, they always had a segment where they would recap the action that had taken place the previous Monday and then talk about the upcoming matches for this coming Monday. And Lance just out of the blue said, he said, we're going to tell you about what went on down at the auditorium this past week. And as a matter of fact, we have some drawings here from a young man named Jerry Lawler that we're going to show you as we talk about the action. And
Wow.
he would talk about the match, and while he did, he held up my drawings, and they were like full screen on the thing. And I'm just sitting there going, wow, this was like the neatest thing that had ever happened to me, So I thought this was great, but then the really great thing was after the show was over, I'm telling my mom, "God, they showed my pictures on the wrestling." I'm calling my next door neighbor and that sort of thing. And then while I was floating around on cloud nine, my telephone rang, and answered the phone, and the voice was unmistakable. This deep voice. Is Jerry Lawler? I said, yeah. He says, Jerry, this is Lance Russell. And I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe Lance Russell called me on the phone. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we really enjoyed your drawings, and everybody really liked the drawings, and we were just wondering if you wanted to, maybe next week you could send us some more drawings, or this week, and we would use those to illustrate what went on at the matches. And of course, I thought this was great. And so I sent more drawings in the next week. Sure enough, they showed them again. Following week, they showed them again. And after about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, Lance called me up again. And this was unbelievable. He called me again and said, everybody just really is enjoying your drawings. And we thought we'd invite you to come over and actually be on TV with us and sit there at the desk and you hold up your drawings and let the people see who's actually doing these illustrations. So, of course, this was like a dream come true. I'm going to get to go and actually be on the wrestling show. So, sure enough, that was my first opportunity to be on a wrestling show. But while I was there, I got to meet, Lance took me around and introduced me to a lot of the wrestlers. And one of the guys, of course, he was everybody's hero in Memphis. He was the big star, was the fabulous Jackie Fargo. And Jackie was like, I idolized Jackie Fargo, and to get to actually meet him and shake hands with him was just the neatest thing in the world. And then what was even cooler was Jackie liked the artwork and the caricatures that I had done of him, and Jackie was into a phase of his career where he was, of course, using his wrestling popularity to sort of branch off into other directions, and he and a sort of a local country music star named Eddie Bond had opened a nightclub in Memphis called the Southern Frontier. And so Jackie asked me if I would be able to come down to their nightclub and paint like little cartoon caricatures of Jackie and Eddie Bond. I thought at first he meant maybe just paint 1 or 2, and finally I found out Jackie really liked looking at these little pictures of himself, because I bet I painted 100 pictures of Jackie and Eddie all over this nightclub. And so it took me literally, it was a work in progress that lasted like for months.
How old were you around this time?
Oh gosh, let's see. I was 17, maybe. I guess, yeah, 17. And so so anyway, after I'm doing all of this drawing and artwork, I finally finished up all of these caricatures, and I think Jackie was looking at this as and Eddie Bond also. These guys were great, not only great self-promoters, but they were great. They always had some kind of angle to try to make a quick buck here or there, and so they both came up with the idea. They said, why don't we start up a little sign company? They said, we'll use our name, and you do the artwork, and we'll call it Bond Fargo Sign Company. And of course, this was before you get your trucks or whatever and all the signs done on computer. This is back when people still hand lettered the sides of trucks and signs on windows and that sort of thing. So basically, we started up a little sign company, and all of a sudden, I'm working for Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond, and I'm going to school. I just graduated high school, and because of my artwork, I was fortunate enough to win a commercial arts scholarship to University of Memphis. So I'm going to, at that time it's called Memphis State. I'm going to Memphis State in the morning, and in the afternoon I come up and paint signs for Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond. And it gave me an opportunity to kind of be around Jackie Fargo a little bit, and I was really just fascinated with what I saw. It was like, to me, like the neatest lifestyle ever. Here's a guy that's on television on Saturday mornings. He goes down on Monday nights, and a huge crowd, falling all over him when he wrestles, and then he has all these fans, and of course a lot of pretty women following him around up at the nightclub. And I just thought, man, this has got to be the greatest life ever. And so we wound up having me work in a little office that was right next door to the Southern Frontier nightclub, and I'm down there painting, and I was really enjoying being around Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond. But what I really, of course, had stars in my eyes about was wrestling. And I wasn't big or anything like that, but I did. When I realized this was something I wanted to do, I enrolled in the wrestling. I started wrestling at Memphis State, and at that time, for some reason, wrestling was big out west, but in the South, or Memphis, especially at Memphis State, just the collegiate wrestling hadn't really caught on. It just wasn't that big, and they didn't have much of a program. Matter of fact, the whole student body, we had 5 guys turn out for wrestling, and the baseball coach doubled as the wrestling coach, and of course we just took a back seat to baseball, and they didn't even have enough guys to like field a competitive team and compete against the other universities. So, but we did get a basic amateur wrestling background while I was there, and I'm thinking in my mind, one of these days I'll get the nerve to tell Jackie Fargo that I'm wrestling here at college, and I would love to try to wrestle for the Memphis organization. But of course I just didn't really have the nerve to do that at that time. So anyway, one day I'm doing my little artwork, painting some signs there, and knock on the door, and this young guy comes in, not much older than me, maybe 22 or 23 years old. And his name was Jerry Vickers, and he was from Missouri, and walked in and introduced himself, and said he's looking for Jackie Fargo. And I said, well, of course he's not here right now. Jackie doesn't get here usually about 7 or 8 at night. And but I said, this is the club, and I said, what do you want with him? And he said, well, I'm just in from Missouri, and I've wrestled a little bit, and I just wanted to talk to him about wrestling here in Memphis. I wanted to find out who you talk to and who you have to know to get booked. And so I thought, here was my fountain of information. Here's a guy. I said, and I wasn't intimidated by this guy at all, because, like I said, he didn't look much older than me. And I said, well, you know what? I said, I've been wondering the same thing. I said, I've been working here for Jackie, and I want to wrestle really bad. And I was wondering how you go about breaking into the business. How would you ever have your first match or get somebody to look at you and see you wrestle? And so I still to this day think that this was just an opportunity for this guy to make a few bucks off of me, because he didn't know me from Adam, and could care less probably about helping me. But he said, well, of course, the first thing you have to do is you have to have wrestling tights and wrestling boots. He said, do you have any of that? Of course, I didn't know where you would even get such a thing. I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, you know what? He said, I got a pair of boots that I can sell you, a couple of pairs of trunks. And I thought, wow, this is great. So I said, well, yeah, I'd be glad to buy them, And he said, okay. And so he goes out to his car, comes back in. He's got a pair of wrestling boots that were about a size too big for me. But anyway, this was like somebody offered me, a buried treasure or something. I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. So I bought the wrestling boots and the trunks from this guy, and I thought, man, now I'm almost there. I'm on my way to being a professional wrestler. And then, though, he told me, he said, well, what you could, of course, you got to have your first match somewhere. And he said, it's probably going to be really tough to get your first match working for this Memphis organization, which at that time, the owners of the territory were Nick Goulas and Roy Welch. And they had promoted wrestling in Memphis for probably about 30 years or so. And he said, but there's a little organization over across the bridge in West Memphis, Arkansas, that just has little small matches on Saturday night, and they have them in this little place called the Avon Theater, which was a little rundown movie theater that had gone out of business, and this wrestling promoter guy was renting it, and he had taken out like the first 10 rows of seat and set a wrestling ring down right in front of the movie screen. And I'll never forget the first time I went over there. That ring was sitting down there, and of course all the seats were kind of dilapidated. And over the ring for a ring light, this big wire was hanging down, and there was this big galvanized wash tub upside down with about 6 or 7 light bulbs inside it, and that was his ring light. But anyway, Jerry Vickers said, you might go across there with me. He said, I'm going to wrestle over there for this guy Saturday night. He said, I'll take you over there, and he said, the only thing you got to do is, he said, don't tell him you've never wrestled before. Just if he asks you if you've wrestled, just say, yeah, you wrestled in Florida or something like that. So anyway, I said, okay, that'll be great. But between that time and that Saturday, I went over and Jerry Vickers was actually staying with a professional wrestler that lived there in Memphis that he knew. I went over and we went out in his backyard, and Jerry showed me a few things, and so he said, tomorrow we're going to go over and meet the West Memphis promoter. The guy's name was Aubrey Griffith. So I got a little bit ahead of myself here. In the meantime, one of the other things that Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond did there in Memphis was they had the nightclub. Eddie was a country music singer, Jackie was a wrestler, and then Eddie was also the program director at a little sort of rinky-dink country music station there called KWAM, KWAM, and it didn't get out very far, but as I said, they played country music. And Eddie Bond did the morning show on there, and Jackie Fargo had an afternoon slot where he was on the radio just as a personality from like 3 to 5. And after I'd been working for those guys for a few months, they actually well, of course I knew about them being on the radio, so I was taking wrestling at University of Memphis, and then I also took another course in broadcasting because I was thinking, one of these days I'll tell these, if I can't get in wrestling, maybe I can help use these guys to get me in radio. And so sure enough, after a while, I told Eddie Bond that I was doing the radio stuff. So they gave me a little shift on at night. I was actually on from like 7 to midnight. It was a time when nobody listened and nobody wanted to work. So they put me in the studio, which was a little Quonset hut over in a really bad part of town. And it was just, like I said, a really rinky-dink radio station. But anyway, we were going to go and meet the West Memphis wrestling promoter the next day. And so I got up all excited. Jerry Vickers called me. I met him. We go over, and sure enough, we walk in. That was my first time to see this little movie theater. And I'll never forget meeting Aubrey Griffith. And I think I had remembered seeing him wrestle a time or two for the Memphis organization, but he was older now and was running this little operation in eastern Arkansas. So Jerry Vickers already knew this guy. And as he said, he was going to wrestle for him this coming Saturday night. Jerry said, Aubrey, I brought a young man with me here from Memphis, and he's interested in wrestling over here in West Memphis. And sure enough, the very first words out of Aubrey's mouth were, he said, well, have you ever wrestled before, son? And I said, yes, sir. And I felt like my face was like a neon sign. I felt like I'm lying. But he said, and I think he knew it, because then the next words he said, yeah, where'd you wrestle? And I said, down in Florida, which was the 2 answers that Jerry Vickers had given me. Unfortunately, he didn't give me any other answers further than that. And the next question out of Aubrey Griffith's mouth was, what promoter did you wrestle for down there? And I said, I can't remember. And of course, Jerry Vickers gives me the nudge and says, Eddie Graham, wasn't it Eddie Graham? And I said, yeah, Eddie Graham. And of course, the guy knew I was lying right then. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I don't have any openings right now, but, leave me your number, and if something comes up, I'll call you. And so I knew, I'd blown my big chance right there. And so I wasn't even thinking about saying this when I went in there, but just all of a sudden I blurted out, well, I just thought that if I was wrestling over here for you, I could talk about it on my radio show every night on KWAM radio. And then all of a sudden, this guy's eyes lit up. And he said, you're on the radio? I said, oh, yeah, I do a show every night from 7 to midnight on KWAM radio. Country music. A lot of wrestling fans listen. I said, he said, well, all right. And you could talk about our matches here in West Memphis on your show if you were wrestling. I said, sure. So he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll put you and Jerry in a tag match this Saturday night. And so, bang, I was in. I couldn't believe it. We left there, and Jerry Vickers was telling me, that was great, man. What a great idea. He said, can you really talk about it on the radio? I said, sure. So, sure enough, I started, that night, man, I started blowing it out. I'm telling everybody, between every record, oh, there's huge, great wrestling action coming to West Memphis, Arkansas. And I went and got sound effects of the bell ringing and the roaring crowd, and I made it to hear me talk about it, it sounded like it was going to be Madison Square Garden. Of course, it's West Memphis. And so plugged it all week long, all excited, got over there to the Avon Theater. And of course, I had never really, I never really knew. Nobody had ever really sat down and told me what wrestling was like. The only inkling that I had, was one time when I was going to the wrestling matches at Ellis Auditorium. One of the guys that worked concessions there once told me, and I was the biggest wrestling fan ever. I'm one of these guys. I thought they were in there killing each other, but somehow I knew surely they weren't really killing each other or they would be dead. And one day, one of the concession guys told me, he said, you know what? He said, these guys actually go downstairs to the auditorium here and talk these matches over. I said, get out. He said, they really do. I said, no way. He said, you want me to show you? I said, yeah. So, it's like right before the matches are going to start. And he said, come with me. We go back through the back of the concession area, down some steps. Be quiet. Open up a little door. Sure enough, there's a big room. And there's the two wrestlers that are going to wrestle against each other on the first match. And they're sitting there talking to each other. Of course, we were ways away, but I could see them sitting there talking. And I said, wow, pretty cool. So that was really basically the only true knowledge that I had about wrestling. I never told this Jerry Vickers guy that I wasn't smart or that I was smart or anything. It just didn't really come up. I guess he just assumed that because I was working for Jackie Fargo that I was. So we were wrestling the big stars in Memphis at that time were a team called the Interns, managed by Dr. Ken Ramey. And that's like, what was that name? Star and Jim Star and can't remember the other guy's name now. But anyway, they were the big stars in Memphis. And in West Memphis, they had a sort of little rip-off tag team called the Executioners that had little white outfits and everything. And they were a couple of pretty big burly guys, of course, not anywhere near the caliber of the real Interns. And so that's who they had Jerry Vickers' eye against. And sure enough, the promoter, Aubrey Griffith, comes in and says to Jerry and I, we got to go in, and I'm just looking around, and I see all the wrestlers, and I'll never forget, we were dressing behind, in a little room behind the movie screen. And I don't know if anybody's ever been behind a movie screen, but it's really cool. It's all perforated. And it's one of those deals where when you were on that side, you could look out and see out there, but the people inside couldn't see you. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if they can see us like we see them. Here's guys sitting there naked. Here's guys talking about their match and all that kind of stuff. And, you look out there and you could see the people out. Obviously, they couldn't see us. But that's when the promoter came over and he got Jerry and I together with these guys that we were going to wrestle. And, I'm soaking it all in, but I didn't want to let anybody know that this was like my losing my virginity as far as wrestling goes. But that's what was happening. And, he said, yeah, I want you guys to go out there and have a good match. And, after about 15 or 20 minutes, one of the Executioners will take the fall on Jerry Vickers. So I'm going,
Wow.
These guys really were talking about the match down there in the auditorium, right? So the match didn't go exactly as I had planned or hoped, because I wanted to try a move that I had seen the Blue Infernos do over in Memphis, and well, actually, the Blue Infernos did it to a wrestler that, and the only reason I remember his name is because of this particular move that I tried to emulate. They were wrestling some young guy that was named Young Anaya, and somewhere in the match, they just grabbed this kid. They'd been beating on him a little bit. They just grabbed him by the seat of his tights and by his hair and just ran him across the ring and threw him between the top rope and the second rope. And that's a move I'd seen done a million times, but every time I'd ever seen somebody get thrown through the ropes, they somehow grabbed the ropes, hooked the ropes, broke their fall and tumbled out onto the floor. And, that was fine. But this particular guy, this young Anaya, somehow when they grabbed him and they shot him through, he would go sailing through the ropes just like a rocket and not touch anything. I mean, he would obviously put his hands to his side and just sail right through there and all the way out onto the floor and land in some kind of tumbling way, and of course not kill himself, but it just really looked great. And so I thought, man, that's what I want to do. I love that move. I want to have one of these guys throw me through the ropes. I'm going to sail out there. Everybody's going to go, oh, wow. So anyway, we'd been wrestling for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and Jerry Vickers tags me in. And just as soon as I got in there, I locked up with the guy. I had no idea how to call a match or anything. I locked up with this executioner, and I said, throw me out of the ring. So he grabs me by the hair, just like young Anaya, runs me across the ring. Here I go, man. I got my hands to the side. I'm sailing out head first. And the next thing I can remember is I'm back behind the movie screen again, back in the dressing room, and I'm laying out like this, and these guys are fanning me right with some towels. I'm like, and they said, "You all right? You all right?" And I'm going, "Huh?" And I'm like coming to, I'm regaining consciousness, and I said, "Yeah." The last thing I remember was hearing a big loud noise. And they said, yeah, that big loud noise was your head hitting the concrete floor when you sailed out of the ring. And so that was my very first match. And it lasted, like I said, about 4 minutes. And I got knocked out like a light because I had no clue of what I was doing. But it was like, to me, the greatest moment of my life. And I went back the next Saturday and the next Saturday, and we wrestled several weeks there. And every week on the radio, I would plug these matches even more and more. And I think the first week I wrestled there, they had like 23 people. And the crowd started coming up. The next week we had like 30 people. And then the fourth week it was up to like 45 people. And everybody was getting all excited. And I think finally, after about the fifth week, we finally broke like 100 people in the crowd. It was just, oh, this is great. And so they all attributed it to the extra plugs on the radio. And then one day, of course, Jackie Fargo had never said a word to me, and I still didn't have the nerve to tell Jackie Fargo that I was wrestling or anything like that. But I'm sure he heard it. He heard me or heard about me plugging it on my radio show. So after about the fifth week, I walk in. I'm getting ready to do. I went to the radio station that afternoon, and I'll never forget. Eddie Bond was sitting in his chair, and he's sitting on the telephone. He's talking to somebody. I walked in, and he goes, "Pick up." And so, what's up? Pick up that extension. And he's going, "No, Jackie, don't do that. Come on. He's a good kid. Don't do that." And so I pick up the extension. I'm listening. And there's Eddie Bond is talking to Jackie Fargo. And he said, "No, that's a bunch of shit." He said, "This kid, he's over there, he's putting on fake wrestling matches, and he's giving us a bad name." And Eddie said, "Well, don't do it, Jackie." He said, "No." He said, "We're not going to take it anymore." He said, "Me and Dennis Hall and several of the guys, Don Al Green, we're going to go over there Saturday night, and we're going to kick their asses." And Eddie said, "Don't hurt the kid." He said, "No, that's bullshit." He said, "We're going to hurt them all. We're going to break somebody's arm or something." He said, "We're not going to stand for those guys putting on a bunch of fake wrestling matches." And so on. I put the phone down. Eddie hangs up. And he said, "Man, Jerry, Jackie's hot. He said, if I was you, I wouldn't go over there Saturday night. So now I'm scared to death. And I called up first of all, Jerry Vickers. And then he said, well, call Aubrey Griffith. And I called the Aubrey Griffith, who of course had worked for years for Goulas and Welch. And I said, Aubrey, we can't have the match Saturday night. He said, why not? I said, because the real wrestlers are going to come over and beat us all up and break our arms or legs or something. And he said, what are you talking about? And so I told him, I said, I heard Jackie Fargo telling Eddie Bond on the phone. And he said, oh, man, come on. He said, all he's trying to do is discourage you. He said, because we're what you call outlaw wrestling. And he said, they look at us as competition. He said, I don't know why, but he said, they look at this as outlaw wrestling. They just try to discourage it any way they can. And they know you're talking about it on the radio, so they just want you to stop. And I said, are you sure? And he said, trust me. Jackie Fargo and Al Green and Don Green are not going to come to West Memphis, Arkansas Saturday night. He said, I'll bet my life on it. So anyway, we went over there Saturday night, and I'll never forget, I told Jerry Vickers, I said, Jerry, I said, we got to watch each other's back. And there was a popular country music song out at that time by a guy named, I don't know, some guy that was on Hee Haw. I think his name was Jerry something, I don't know. But anyway, it was about a rabbit that could run real fast, and it said, the words to it was, that's all right, my ears may be thin, but I can burn the wind. Or I can run so fast, I'll burn the wind. So I'll never forget, Jerry Vickers said, when I'm in the ring, you watch the back door. He said, when you're in the ring, I'll watch the back door. He said, if anybody comes through that even looks like a wrestler, he said, we'll burn the wind. And so sure enough, we would go and wrestle, and no wrestlers showed up. And that's when I knew that these guys were right. They were just trying to discourage me from being involved with the outlaw wrestling. And the following week, I guess Jackie knew that I sort of called his bluff. And the following week, Jackie Fargo came to me and he said, look, kid, he said, I guess you're set on trying to be a wrestler. He said, if I get you a match with Nick Goulas' organization, will you quit fooling with that crap over in West Memphis, Arkansas? And I said, oh my gosh, absolutely. I said, that's all I wanted. I said, I just was, I was just embarrassed to ask you. And so he said, all right. He said, I'll get you a match for Nick Goulas. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be wrestling for the real Memphis wrestling organization. And next week I got a phone call from, I don't think it was Nick Goulas, somebody in the office, probably Christine Jarrett. And they said, we need you. We're going to have you booked to wrestle this Saturday morning on Memphis television. And little did I know at the time that, wrestling on Memphis television and just being a job guy getting beat by somebody in a few minutes was like the lowest rung of the ladder of entering wrestling. But I thought it was the best. I thought that was the biggest thing to actually, I thought you'd probably have to wrestle forever before you actually got to wrestle on television. So I was in heaven. Man, I'm a television wrestler already, right off the bat, my first match. And my first match on Channel 13 that Saturday morning was, I think, against the interns, the real interns. And they just slaughtered me and my partner. But, I mean, it probably in less than a minute, but it was like I made it. I loved it. And then I got, after a couple of weeks of television, getting beat bad on television, they booked me in a match in Jonesboro, Arkansas, which was my first house show. And they booked me against Tojo Yamamoto, who Tojo was this little Japanese guy that, oh gosh, poor little guy. I mean, he was really mean and tough, at least that's the outward appearance. And he had no family, and he was kind of a loner, and he just really did. He was in a bad mood all the time. And he really resented young guys coming into the business for some reason. And Tojo was just always real tough on the young guys that were trying to start out. And I found out later that they would book young guys against Tojo because he would literally beat you up so bad in your match with him that if you came back, then they said, well, this guy's got potential. Because Tojo would usually make guys have other ideas about being a professional wrestler. So I had my first match with Tojo in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and I thought he was going to kill me. I mean, he would slap you so hard with the chops and hit you so. I mean, his whole thing was the Japanese karate and judo. He would hit you so hard in the back of the neck, kick you in the stomach, just everything so stiff that literally you thought you were going to die. And so he beat on me for probably 10 or 12 minutes, and then of course beat me. And I went back to the dressing room, and Jackie Fargo was there waiting. He said, "Oh, kid, still want to be a wrestler?" And it was like, no doubt. I mean, I even though I'd gotten my brains beat out, I just loved it. I mean, that was the first time in front of a kind of a big crowd, and I said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And so for about 4 weeks straight, they booked me against Tojo, and every week he'd beat me worse than he did the week before, and I guess just by the fact that I kept coming back and kept asking to wrestle again, they said, well, the kid really does have potential. He's got some staying power. He's not just going to be a fly-by-night guy and leave. So after about 4 weeks, they started letting me wrestle some other guys and started actually booking me out in the territory. And what happened was I had to make a decision because I was going to be traveling quite a bit. Then rather than just wrestling on Saturday night, they wanted to start booking me all through the week on a full-time basis. So then I had to make a decision about giving up not only the radio show at night, but more importantly, giving up, basically quitting college. And so I guess I made the right decision. I don't know, but anyway, I quit Memphis State and started wrestling full-time.
Who were some of the other veterans that helped you learn the business, basically?
I don't know if any. I can honestly say, of course, Jackie Fargo, most and foremost. But really helping me learn the business, I sort of just kind of bluffed my way through it. It was like I never really. I didn't really give the impression, I don't guess, that I was a complete novice. Fortunately, I was, and I'm not trying to sound conceited or arrogant or anything, but I was pretty good from the get-go, and it wasn't like guys. I mean, of course, when I wrestled all of these guys, the interns and the greens and all of these established veterans, so to speak, I learned every time I was in the ring with them. But it wasn't that they were necessarily going out of their way to help me learn. They were just doing whatever they had to do to try to have a good match. There was another wrestler named Buddy Wayne, Dwayne Peel. Now he helped me in the fact that he would actually ask Nick Goulas to have me wrestle in his towns, and that that exposure, of course, and that getting able to wrestle more often helped a lot. But mostly Jackie Fargo.
How influential was Jerry Jarrett to you in your career?
Oh, well, Jerry Jarrett was. I don't know if influential is a big word. Jerry was of course a big part of my career, and of course we later on became business partners. But Jerry was starting out at basically the same time I was. Well, actually, he started a little bit before me. But the difference was Jerry grew up in a wrestling family. His mother, Christine Jarrett, was Nick Goulas and Roy Welch's secretary in the wrestling office there in Nashville for something like 17 years before Jerry actually got in the business. And so he had come up with inside knowledge of wrestling and knowing more so about how the office and the business end of the business worked more so than the in-ring stuff. And then he started out by promoting towns and booking towns. And then, and I don't really know why, because I really wasn't close friends with Jerry at the time. Then Jerry started wrestling. And I'll never forget, that was the first time that a guy that was Jerry, Jerry was not big physically or anything like that. He was a small guy and not big muscles or anything like that. And I'll never forget, a lot of the people thought, well, a lot of the other wrestlers were saying, this guy, he's only getting to wrestle because his mother works in the office and because he works in the office and that sort of thing. But I didn't even realize at the time that he was like helping book the towns for Nick Gulas and Roy Welch, and that he was sort of the brains behind a lot of these shows. And so actually, Jerry and I had a little bit of a falling out right off the bat because they started using me a little bit, and on some of the same shows that Jerry was on. I remember it was Huntsville, Alabama one night. He came over to me and sat down. First time I really talked to him. He came over and sat down and said, "Hey, I want to make a little suggestion about what I saw you do in your match out there." And as I said, I didn't know that. I just thought Jerry was one of the other wrestlers, and young guy, not too much older than me, and so he gave me some sort of suggestion about what he thought I should do, and I'm thinking to myself, why should I listen to this guy? He's trying to tell me what to do. He's just great behind the ears too, So I don't remember what he told me, but I do know that my famous words to him was after he sat there and gave me his suggestion. I looked over at him and I said, "Hey, you wrestle your way, I'll wrestle my way." Okay. The next week, somehow I was sent to Montgomery, Alabama, which was like the worse than the farm club. I mean, it was like going from the major leagues down to single A baseball. And I didn't realize at the time that it was Jerry Jarrett that was behind that. But I found out really quickly that Jerry was one of the bosses. And so, in actuality, though, moving or getting sent down to the Alabama territory, which was a little feeder organization and a little training organization for Gulas and Welch's bigger territory, it really was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I got to wrestle with guys that were more on my skill level, and I got to be put in more important matches, whereas for Gulas and Welch, I was just wrestling opening matches and getting beat every night. When I went to Alabama, because I was, as I said, either equal or better than a lot of the talent that was there, I got put into feature matches in that area, main events, and that's where I met Sam Bass and Jim White. We hooked up as a tag team there, and did so well there that we eventually got noticed again by Jerry Jarrett and Nick Gulas, and got called back up.
No, eventually when in, I guess it was late 70s, you were a heel, I believe, in Memphis, right?
The late 70s, I don't know. It's like I was heel, babyface,
right,
whatever, so many times. I think I started out as a babyface, but then when it got shipped down to Alabama, came back from Alabama in like 73 or 74, something like that. And that's when I came back as a heel, with Sam Bass managing me, and stayed heel probably until after Sam died.
Now, would you say that one of your big matches would be with Jack Brisco? Was that like one of the big turning points in your career?
Oh, well, what happened, I guess the way I even got to wrestle Jack Brisco was the fact that I for some reason was always a fan of, as I said, I was a fan of the bad guys, but I was a fan of more the high flying acrobatic type wrestling and the big bumps and that sort of thing than I was the big plodding, slow, get a hold and hold it for 15-minute type matches. And we in the Tennessee territory at that time, they had a lot of big guys that wrestled that style. The interns were pretty good bump takers, but then there were guys like Don and Al Green that were bigger and more methodical, and the Von Brauners were more just a pounding type tag team, and there weren't really any what you called high flyers and that sort of thing. Well, Jim White and I came into the territory, and that's the part of the business I enjoyed, was taking bumps. And I would go out in my match, and the fun of the match and what I felt like got me over was, as I said, flying around and taking bumps, where most of the guys' mentality at that time, the heels' mentality, was what they thought got them over was beating the baby faces down and pounding and looking strong. And so the funny thing happened. The guys like Jerry Jarrett, Tojo Yamamoto were like the top babyface team, and Jackie Fargo was interchanged in and out of there. And when they wrestled against these guys that were always in the main event, and when they wrestled against guys like the Greens or the Von Brauners or the Interns, they would just get pounded down, and of course they would eventually win. But it was just like most of the match they were selling, and so they're looking at us down on the opening matches, and we're flying around and taking bumps and getting beat, and of course the fans are cheering for the guys that we're wrestling like crazy because we're making these guys look like $1 million. And so it didn't take very long that Jerry Jarrett came to me and went to Jackie Fargo and said, "Hey, why don't we work a program with Lawler and White? And these guys make us look good." And so sure enough, that's what happened. We got moved right up simply because of the way the style that we worked. We were more selling type heels and begging off and being a cowardly type heel as opposed to being the big strong heel. And for some reason that just clicked. It got over, and we started drawing big houses. After about a year or so, Jim White left the team and moved out of Memphis, and so I went to become the single wrestler. And of course, I can't take credit for this. They just got the idea to push me into title contention, and I'll never forget the way they did it. They looked around and they picked out like the top 10. They told the people, King's going to go on or Jerry Lawler's going to go on this quest for the title, but in order to get a title shot, he's got to go through the top 10 contenders. And they had a list of Terry Funk, Dory Funk, The Sheik, Bobo Brazil, Dick the Bruiser, all of these big names that people had only read about in magazines or things in Memphis. These guys had not really ever even come to Memphis, but the people knew that they were big national stars. And this was the first time that the promoters, Goulas and Welch, and I think Jerry Jarrett was the one that talked them into doing it, actually went to the expense of paying the trans and flying these guys in, these big stars into Memphis to wrestle me, and the people just got swept up into it. And all of this was to try to get a shot at Jack Brisco, who was at the time the NWA World Champion. I got to wrestle. The funny thing was, this was one of my shining moments as far as being a talker or doing interviews, because every one of these top 10 guys that came in, once they saw me, they without exception, they all refused to put me over. It was like, we had the idea that I would come in and I would get to win over all of these guys and then face Jack Brisco. But I didn't realize that all these guys didn't always do business that way. And, they would all get there. And I'll never forget the Sheik came down and I went back to his dressing room and sat down beside him and started talking to him a little bit. And he was putting clothes on and all this kind of stuff and getting his gear out. And I'm trying to make small talk. And after a little while, he said, "Kid, do you know who I'm wrestling tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, me." And he said, "Oh, I thought you were like the ring crew or something." So anyway, it boiled down to a lot of these guys got disqualified or one way or the other, or count out or some sort of thing. Sam Bass interfered. But anyway, I was able to talk my way after the match and convince everybody on television that I had won each one of these matches. And so finally got to wrestle Jack Brisco, and that that was probably one of the biggest matches as far as instant credibility. But I think this quest for the title thing really led up to that and made that match that big.
You kind of just touched on your skills with the mic. How did you develop your skills? Because with probably one of the best talkers in the business. And
well, I think without a doubt being on the radio beforehand, but I still got to go back once again and credit Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond for giving me that opportunity, and a couple of guys. One guy that was a disc jockey there in Memphis and has now gone on to be one of the most famous DJs in the country. He's still on the biggest rock station in New York City right now. His name's Scott Shannon, At that time, Scott Shannon was a DJ in Memphis, and I, once again, through my art, I entered a art contest that Scott Shannon and his radio station put on, and won the art contest, and got to meet Scott and befriended him, and he gave me a lot of pointers on radio stuff and that kind of thing. And I just think that background helped me, know what it took to be able to communicate or communicate your thoughts to the people that were out there watching them, and not to be, not to be afraid of the camera, and not to be, to know that the worst thing they could have is dead air. To just basically keep talking all the time, and that was a big part of it.
At what point did you start to get the book and use some of your ideas on TV?
Oh, well, that wasn't until after Jerry Jarrett and I had basically gone into business for ourselves, and that came about in, I think, 1977. Jerry was, as I said, once again working for Nick Goulas and Roy Welch, and he was booking the Memphis there. The Tennessee territory was divided into sort of two ends. There was the Memphis end and the Birmingham end, and there were enough wrestlers in this area that you could book two cities every night and have a full crew at each one of the cities. And the Memphis end consisted of Memphis and Jackson, and Jackson, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, and Jonesboro, Arkansas, and Tupelo, Mississippi, and Evansville, Indiana. And the Birmingham end had Birmingham and Huntsville and Nashville and Bowling Green, and the Memphis end also had Louisville. And so Jerry was booking the Memphis end, and Nick was booking the Birmingham end. And the Memphis end, where Jerry was wrestling, and Jackie Fargo and Tojo and myself and Jim White, was like doing record business. We were drawing really big crowds, selling out week in and week out in almost all of the cities. And Birmingham was really not doing very well. And one of the reasons Birmingham wasn't doing very well is because Nick Goulas had a son named George who had become about 20 or 22 years old and decided that he wanted to be a wrestler. And George was not very gifted athletically, even had a little bit of a speech impediment and zero charisma, and was not very well liked simply because he was the boss's son. And Nick decided that if his son George, which was his only child, his son George wanted to be a wrestler, damn it, he was going to be a wrestler. He didn't care what anybody thought. He didn't care what the other wrestlers wanted. He didn't care what the fans wanted. So Nick took his son George and pushed him into the limelight and into the main events and all of the towns on the Birmingham end. And the people just thought that sucked, and they resented him. They knew he was only there because he was the boss's son, and they just quit coming. They just quit coming in droves. And so Nick is sitting there looking at his end doing terrible, and the Memphis end selling out, and George is looking at that also, and George is going out wrestling in front of nobody over in Birmingham, while Memphis, we had 11,500 people at the Coliseum. So George went to Nick and said, "Dad, I want to wrestle in Memphis." Right. And so then Nick went to Jerry Jarrett and said, "Jerry, I want you to book my boy over in Memphis." And Jerry said, "No, Nick, I'm not going to book George in Memphis." He said, "We're doing great. We're selling out. I'm not going to change things." And, of course, George was Nick's son, and Nick said, "Hey, boy, this is my territory, and I say you're going to book George in Memphis." And apparently, and I didn't even know all this was going on, Jerry had been paying into Nick a certain amount of money every week or every month to buy part of the territory, to become a part owner of the territory. And so finally, over George, it became this big stalemate, this big standoff. And Nick said, "You are going to book George in Memphis." And Jerry said, "I'm not." And Nick said, "I own this territory, and you are." And Jerry said, "Look, I own part of this territory too, and I'm not." And Nick said, "Boy, you don't own nothing." He said, "You haven't been buying nothing." And so Jerry said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I own all of this territory, and what I say goes." So somehow Jerry checking, sure enough, apparently what he was buying. Nick was taking money, but Jerry was not getting any stock or any percentage of the territory or anything like that. So Jerry went to Nick, and he basically quit. He said, I'm going to go in business on my own. And Nick said, go ahead, boy, you won't last 2 days. And so that's when Jerry came to me. Of course, I was like the top heel in the Memphis end. And he came to me and he said, now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going into business for myself. Not going to be with Nick. Not going to have the good TV on Channel 13. Not going to be able to wrestle at the Mid-South Coliseum. We're going to have to move somewhere else. And he said, I'm not going to be able to pay you what Nick, I'm sure, is going to offer you. But what I will do, if you will come with me, is I will cut you in on a percentage of the new territory. You'll get paid out of the profits. You'll make money if we make money. And he said, I feel certain we will. And that was my first introduction to like a free agency thing. That was my first involvement in seeing, two promoters bidding for one piece of talent, which now, of course, everybody knows goes on all the time. And it was a really unique situation and a hard decision because, Nick did come to me and offer me more money and a sure thing if I stayed with him. But I may have said it was a hard decision. It really wasn't a hard decision. It was a decision to make, but I knew what was going to happen if anybody that stayed with Nick. George Goulas was going to be shoved down everybody's throat, and it was going to kill the territory. And so I made my move and went with Jerry Jarrett. I was living in Memphis at the time, and I went over to I talked with Jerry, and he told me where to go and who to talk to. And I'll never forget, I went in by myself, walked into Channel 5. Of course, the main wrestling show was on Channel 13. And I went into Channel 5 one day and asked to speak to the program director. I walked into Channel 5 just right off the street, asked to speak to the program director. It was a guy named Phil Slavic. And took me to his office, and I introduced myself. And, of course, he knew who I was because at the time, the wrestling program on Channel 13 was the highest-rated television show in all of Memphis. We beat out we had higher ratings than the primetime shows that were on in the evenings, the network shows. And so I said, I'm here to offer you guys a wrestling show. Myself and just about all of the main wrestling stars that you see on Channel 13 would like to come and wrestle here on Channel 5. And so Phil went, whoa, wait a minute, let me go get the general manager. And so he went and got the manager of Channel 5, and I basically told him the story and what we wanted to do. And the very next week, we had a show right on Channel 5, going right up, heads up against the Channel 13 show. And if my memory serves me right, I think the Channel 13 show, which Nick said that we wouldn't last 2 weeks, I think the Channel 13 show lasted about 2 weeks, and it was off the air. And so then we were there, and of course, basically without TV in Memphis, Nick knew he didn't have a chance. He looked around the other stations, couldn't get a show on. And so to show you how powerful the show was at that time, Channel 13, when it had the wrestling show, had the highest rated program in Memphis, and the wrestling show had the highest rated news at 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock because Dave Brown was the weatherman, and he was also the co-host of the wrestling show, and just Dave's personality was so strong that it made their news number one. And Lance Russell was the program director at Channel 13. And so all of these guys, they had a big show, and they had two great personalities. And like I said, after 2 weeks, that show went off the air, and we wound up bringing Dave Brown to Channel 5 and put their news immediately in number one at 5 and 10 o'clock. And we also brought Lance Russell. He quit his job as a program director at Channel 13 and came with us and came to work for Jerry and I at the wrestling organization, and of course co-hosted this show on Channel 5.
I want to talk about Jimmy Valiant. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's it.
Okay, I want to talk about. Actually, I got a long list of guys that I want to discuss.
Okay,
And one of the first guys would be Jimmy Valiant, the Boogie Woogie Man.
Jimmy Valiant. I've often tried to remember exactly when the first time I met Jimmy was, and I honestly can't recall, but I know that I guess Jerry Jarrett brought him into the territory because Jerry was doing the booking then. He brought him into work against me at the time, and Jimmy was just he was one of the coolest, most charismatic individuals that you ever meet in your life. I mean, he was not a great worker, not a great wrestler at all, but he just had a great look. I mean, he was handsome Jimmy. He at that time he had a great physique. He had already, of course, done the Valiant brother thing in a stint in New York, and came into Memphis as the boy from New York City with that music as his theme song, and he had the long blonde hair, the mustache, and all of this sort of stuff, and he just he really took Memphis and that territory by storm. As I said, mainly because of his interview skills and his look. He was he was a passable wrestler. He could do everything he needed to do in the ring to get by. But what made him and put him way over the top was his look and his interviews, and always a fun guy to work with, always easy to work with, and then, oh gosh, then Jimmy went through some phases where he fell in love with Big Mama. I can't even begin to tell you all of the different things that the phases that Jerry Jarrett and I went through with Jimmy Valiant. He was so over in our territory that he left, and then we tried to get him desperately to come back, and we even wound up, and this is like still unheard of. I don't know if anybody's ever done this to this day. We went out and bought. He gave us all these conditions to get him to come back. We had to go out and buy Jimmy Valiant a house. we literally went around and shopped and bought this guy a house. And he came back to Memphis and moved Big Mom in it. And we had to have all of the porcelain in the house had to be black. He wanted everything in the house was black. A black tub, black sink, black tile floors. It was like unbelievable. And so we bought Jimmy a house, and he came back, and he stayed in Memphis for about, maybe in that house for like a month or whatever. And then he just disappeared on us. Went to Atlanta, and so Jerry Jarrett and I were stuck with a house with all black interior, and I don't know how long it took us to try to sell that thing, but we eventually the only way we sold it was some sucker bought it because it had been Jimmy Valiant's house, because it just looked horrible. But Jimmy went to Atlanta and was doing real well down there, and he ballooned up, got real big, and sort of, I thought then really started. I don't know, he almost became a caricature of himself, really kind of taking the shortcuts, but he was doing all it had to do to get over. Jimmy just had to shake his head, shake the ropes, and that sort of thing, and play the music, do the legs, and that was the Boogie Woogie Man is what he became then. And then, of course, he had Big Mama, I think, as a valet, and of course that was his wife, and they had a child, and Jimmy was really happy at that time, and loved to just live. They actually named the kid Little Handsome Junior, and everything was going cool for Jimmy, and I think this is pretty accurate as to what happened but I think when his son was about 10 or 11 years old. As I said, he's living in Atlanta or the Carolinas or something, and they're perfectly happy. And all of a sudden, there's a knock at this door, and Jimmy's wife, Big Mama, goes to the door, and there on the doorstep is a woman and about an 11-year-old kid. And she tells Jimmy's wife that this kid is Jimmy Valiant's son also. And so it was one of those deals where probably like a one-night fling or something, 11 years ago. Handsome Jimmy had been with this woman. They did all the blood tests, and it came back pretty much positive that it was like 99 and 9.9. And I remember asking Jimmy, I said, what did it say? I mean, what did the test say? He said, brother, it said 99.999. And he said the 9 just kept going until it went right off the page. And he said, that kid's mine. And so, man, his wife left him. Big Mama left him, took his son, and it just like, that just crushed Handsome Jimmy. And he wound up, I think, moving to Virginia or something, up in the woods, and he became like this vegetarian and almost a recluse, and he was just like never the same. Everybody, you see, he lost all this weight, and I think, I honestly think that he just almost grieved himself to death. But he still would make shots and come in, but it just like his heart wasn't in it anymore. And I love Handsome Jimmy to this day, and we had some great matches and some great feuds, and he and I almost got us kicked out of the Mid-South Coliseum because we had a hair against hair match one time, and neither one of us got our heads shaved, and they had a riot and set seats on fire and broke windows out of the Coliseum, and Handsome Jimmy and I have done it all. He's just a great guy. I love him.
What about Bill Dundee?
Bill Dundee, talking about doing it all. I probably had more matches against Bill Dundee than I have against any other single individual in wrestling. Bill and I, for some reason, we had a chemistry that we just really worked well together in the ring, either as partners or as opponents. And I think there was that a real rivalry there. I don't think Bill ever really, for real, ever really liked me, and and Bill and I weren't really, have never been close friends. We never lived in the same city, never socialized, saw each other at the matches, got along, but we're never really big buddies. And so I think that the people realized that came across on TV. There were two sort of big egos clashing there. And, that Jerry Jarrett also realized that, and wound up booking us in, every kind of match imaginable.
Dutch Mantel. Dirty Dutch.
Dirty Dutch Mantel. Dutch, he and I are what we call cosmic brothers. Not only were we weren't just born on the same date, Dutch and I were born on the same day, just a few hours apart. He is older than me, as a matter of fact, by about 6 hours. And so I think, Dutch and I were a lot alike. And Dutch and I sort of got in the business, I think, a lot alike. He had a wrestler that he really admired a lot and emulated. I'll never forget when I first met Dutch. He was wrestling as, of course, Wayne Cowan, but he was trying to be Ox Baker. And Dutch and I had a lot of big matches there in Memphis, but when I think when Dutch and I weren't wrestling against each other, it was always and this caused really a lot of animosity with a lot of guys. And I'm not saying deep hatred or anything like that, but maybe a little bit of resentment. But it really wasn't my fault. It was Jerry Jarrett doing the booking. But if Dutch and I were wrestling each other, we were like in the main event. If we weren't wrestling each other, Dutch was usually in like the semifinal, and I was still wrestling somebody else in the main event. And I think that's there was a little bit of resentment there, but we pretty much always got along until I don't know the last time I saw Dutch. I think he left our territory with one of our championship belts and didn't bring it back, and then he was writing some little wrestling newsletters, and I heard he knocked me a few times, but that's just Dutch and I. But he's I had no real problems with Dutch Mantel.
Can you talk about your on and off again relationship with Eddie Gilbert, and what all about Eddie Gilbert? Thoughts on Eddie?
Yeah, I don't know if it was an on again or off again relationship with Eddie Gilbert. I think Eddie probably thought that it was an on again and off again relationship. I always liked Eddie Gilbert. Eddie was, of course, a second generation wrestler, son of Tommy Gilbert, and and you'd have to know the Gilbert family, and especially Tommy Gilbert. Everybody always liked Tommy, but he was I mean, just the word or the MO on Tommy was that he was moody, and Eddie and I think Doug and all of those, both the sons sort of got that trait from Tommy, and not to say that there's anything bad about it, but sometimes sometimes they'd be in a great mood and you could just joke around with them, and then other times you might say something that you had said to them the day before and they'd get all mad and huffed up about it, and I think there was some kind of weird, I don't even know if it's weird or whatever, but some kind of bit of a fixation in the fact that even though Eddie grew up watching wrestling, watching his dad wrestle, once he got into wrestling, he instead of sort of following in his dad's footsteps and emulating his father, he tried to emulate me. It was like I was the wrestler that he sort of wanted to be like, and people said that he like idolized the King and that sort of thing. And I often thought that it sort of got to a point at one time, and I even talked to Eddie about it, and he said, "Yeah, this would be a great idea for an angle," where he like didn't want to just be like me; he wanted to be me, and so we even started to do a program with that sort of thing. But I think that Eddie, if we ever had problems, I think the only real problems that we had was, I think Eddie wanted to be the booker, and of course did go on in other territories and be the booker, but he never really got the chance while Jerry and I was booking to book our territory, and I think that caused if there were off periods of our relationship, I think that is what caused him. He felt like that he should have the opportunity to book, and not saying that he shouldn't have had, but it just didn't. Jerry and I had a situation where Jerry would book for 6 months and I would book for 6 months. Jerry would book for 6 months. I would, and that way we pretty much stayed fresh and didn't get totally burned out. And I remember one time we tried Bill Dundee as a booker, and we just didn't. It's one of those things. Probably we were overly critical, but we didn't think it worked out. We didn't think it would work out to have Eddie do the booking, and so I think that may have caused whatever problems that we had.
What about Doug Gilbert? Did you guys have Feud? Because I remember I read something that.
Yeah. I guess there was some heat there. And I'll have to think a minute to see who or how exactly that it got started. Somebody, and it may have involved, all I can say is definitely a miscommunication. I think now that I think about it, I think it involved Sid Vicious. In the old story of when one person says something to somebody, and by the time it gets told to this person, and then told to this person, and finally when it gets back to another person, the story has changed 3 or 4 times. Somehow, and I don't know if it went directly from Sid to Doug or from Sid to somebody and then to Doug. But anyway, somebody said something after Eddie had passed away. Somebody told Doug that I said to Sid that Eddie had died of a drug overdose. And I'll just, will tell you, I didn't say that. And to this day, I don't really know what Eddie Gilbert died of. But when anybody asks me, just out of protectiveness of the business, I would tell people that Eddie died of a heart attack. Whether he did or didn't or whatever, I just wouldn't tell anybody because I think it just casts a negative appearance on our business in general. And I think we all, if you're in this business, you love it, and you don't want anything negative said about it. But anyway, somehow Doug got word that I called Eddie a drug head and said that he died of a drug overdose. And so he called my house, and left this big rambling message, cussing and screaming and ranting and raving how he was going to kill me the next time he saw me, and all of this kind of stuff. And so then I didn't hear or see Doug for a long time, and then one day, out of the clear blue, we passed each other in the airport, and he'd said all of this stuff about how he wanted to kill me and everything. And then I'm walking down the airport, and he's walking the other way, and I saw him, and he goes, "Hi, Kane. Hi, Doug." And I didn't get killed or anything, so I thought, well, maybe he's cooled off. And then he would talk to Brian, Christopher a lot, and I think he, through Brian, said, he apologized and didn't mean to say all of those things, and wanted to come back to work. And so finally, we let him come back to wrestle there in Memphis. And after a couple of weeks on the show there, he went out. Of course, Memphis TV was always live. He went out on Memphis TV and just gave this big tirade, went off into left field, knocking me and saying all kind of bad things about me. And then Randy Hales was running the show at the time, and I was out of town. And afterwards, Randy, I think, fired him, and I haven't seen him or talked to him since. So I don't know. It's one of those things. Like I said, I've been in this business nearly 30 years, and you meet some really unique individuals. Everybody's got their own personality, and I can honestly say that and I may be different. A lot of people think that everybody and all of the guys are really close friends, and that's just at least in my case, and I think in most people's case, that's not the case. We are around each other a lot of times more so than you are with your own family, just because that's the nature of the job. But as far as being real close friends, that's just I have guys that I would say or call my friends, but as far as real close friends, I don't have that many that are in the business. So I can say, I don't really, have a great deal of affection for a lot of people in this business. But by the same token, there's not anybody out there that I could just say, oh, I hate that guy. I mean, I may have had run-ins with guys here and there, but it's the nature of this business, and you realize after a while, it's not that big a deal. If Doug Gilbert doesn't like me or whatever, it's Doug Gilbert's problem. I could care less.
What are your memories about Tommy Rich?
Tommy Rich, I remember Jerry Jarrett and I taking Tommy Rich. Tommy Rich was a friend of the family of Jerry Jarrett, and Tommy was a pretty good high school athlete. And I remember Jerry and I meeting up in Hendersonville in this big barn of Jerry's, and I brought a friend of mine from high school that I thought was a pretty good little athlete named Jerry Bryant, and Jerry brought Tommy Rich, and we set out to train these two guys, and we worked with them and trained them and got them both in the business. And of course, Tommy was one of the first guys that got a kind of a national push at a young age. It was, wrestling. I really think up until Tommy Rich had featured more veteran guys as the stars. The older wrestlers. And Tommy, I think, was one of the first real young guys that got a big push, and of course did real well, had a lot of success. And then I don't know, whatever's to blame. I think Tommy would probably admit that he didn't handle substance abuse real well, whether it be, I think mainly Tommy's problem was alcohol, and I think it really hurt his career, and it certainly hurt his longevity in the business, because Tommy started way after I did, and was a lot younger, and really should still be around today, and probably should still be a big star today.
What was it like working with Austin Idol? I heard from a lot of people he was really difficult and big ego.
It was never difficult for me to work with Austin Idol. Another guy that was always, he was much like Jimmy Valiant in the fact that, once again, and Austin might disagree with this, but not the greatest worker in the world, but a very, good, capable worker. But man, as far as the look and the interviews, he was as good as anybody. But I think Austin would probably tell you that, I don't know, I don't think lazy is the right word to use, but Austin just didn't, he was not that dedicated to the business that he wanted to devote his full time to it. He was Austin's big family man, wife and kid, and he I think the main thing was he just didn't want to be away from home that much, and lived in Pensacola, Florida. Still does to this day. Still looks great. I just saw some pictures of him not too long ago, and I'm sure could go right in the ring today and still perform as well as he ever did. But it's just I think he just had different priorities.
What are your memories of your empty arena match with Terry Funk?
I thought it sucked. And as a matter of fact, we went around the country and drew a lot of empty arenas with that program. Now, I don't know. At the time, it's one of those things that at the time we thought it was great, and now when I look back on it, I go, I just cringe. And not because of Terry, because Terry's performance was great with the eye and all that sort of thing. But I just wish we had done a lot more. That was the opportunity to do the first. It was I guess a first of its kind anyway. But that was the opportunity to be a first ever hardcore match without having to worry about fan involvement or anybody else getting hurt or anything like that. And I feel we dropped the ball in the fact that we didn't do enough. We stayed in the ring a little bit. We fought outside. We went over into the chairs just a little bit, and then back up and broke the ring steps. And then, as Terry had a big jagged piece of wood and was trying to stick it in my eye in some kind of way, I don't know, a kick or whatever. But boom, hit Terry in the eye and the blood. And then his performance with my eye. That'll go down in history. Everybody, see, guys still today will pass me in the hallway in some arena and go, "Oh, my eye." Terry's just great. You never knew what he was going to do. But I just wish, on my end, that we had done more in that match. But people ask me all the time, who's one of the most enjoyable guys to work with, and I always mention Terry because he was it was just like fun. He was so wild and crazy. You never knew what he was going to do. I don't think he knew what he was going to do next. So the matches were always unpredictable, and nothing like I think that's probably one of the reasons that today it's like the matches, everything it has to be laid out step by step by step. And Terry would have never put up with that. He was just such a great ad-libber, and like I said, you would go to the ring with Terry not having a clue what you were going to do, and you could always depend on him to pull something out that would be just fantastic.
What are your memories about when Hulk Hogan came through the territory for a brief period of time?
My memory is that Jerry Jarrett and I co-signed for Hulk's first car, and we never got reimbursed when he skipped out on his own territory. And Hulk, he made all this big money. You could at least pay him back for that car. I remember when Hulk first came in. I can't remember if he came to us from Florida or if I believe he did, and then went from us up to Verne, and then of course Verne to Vince. But he was one of those guys that when you saw him, you knew that he was going to be something special, just because he had such a unique look, and the voice, and at this time he was really just becoming the Hulk, and I think we kind of helped shape and mold him along that road by doing some, we were one of the first companies that sort of innovated the wrestling vignettes or the music videos and that sort of thing to help get guys over. We always felt that you could do more than just have somebody beat somebody in the ring to help them get over with the people, and we did some really entertaining and great little videos on the Hulk, and at the time he was there, Memphis was a great place to work. I mean, you get a lot of work there, but it was not ever a place that you were going to make a lot of money at that time, and you had to really want to be there and want to improve your skill or whatever, and know that that's what you're going to get to do there, because you certainly weren't going to get rich there. There just weren't. There were a lot of wrestlers there. The payoffs were spread thin, and even though we wrestle every night, the houses were at a lot of times not all that big, and so the payoffs were not that great. And I think that that Hulk realized after he was there for a while that he just didn't think he was making enough money, and was going to try to go on somewhere where he could make more money. And then of course he went on up for Verne Gagne, and then came back through after he was the Hulk, and he and I had some pretty memorable matches then, and I like to think that I think that he would say that he probably learned a little bit working with me. We had some pretty good matches, and a lot of people knock Terry, but I can't knock the guy. He's probably the best self-promoter that has ever come along in this business, and that's what you have to be in this business to be successful. And nobody's done it any better than him, and he made a lot of money for himself, made a lot of money for other companies, and really helped bring a lot of attention to this business. All I can say is more power to him.
Memories working with Randy Savage.
Randy Savage. Now Randy was. I always felt like I mentioned a lot of these guys now that are in the past that when I say, well, we're not great workers but had charisma and could make good interviews. Randy, I always felt like pretty much had it all. He was a very, very good worker, in-ring performer. Could make great interviews and had the look and had the charisma, and he and I had great matches. There was a little heat and animosity there. I think probably more so between Randy and Jerry Jarrett, and more between our companies than individuals, so to speak, because Randy and I, after he and his dad and his brother went into business for themselves up in Kentucky, and they ran a little outlaw promotion, so to speak, sort of like
AWA.
Yeah, exactly. So sort of like the little promotion that I started out for in West Memphis. Well, they did the same thing up in Lexington, Kentucky, and ran little small towns around that area, and we viewed them as like a thorn in the side in competition, outlaw wrestling. We probably made it difficult on Randy, and they felt that we were, they probably felt that they were no threat to us, and we were trying to put them out of business and that sort of thing. So there was some animosity there. And finally, I think the reality of it was it's very, very difficult, very costly to try to run a small promotion like that. And they just were about to go belly up simply because there was not enough money to keep going. And so they called us up and said, what about us trying to work together a little bit, or at least have this big inter-promotion rivalry between these two companies before they went out of business, and that's what we wound up doing. And in Lexington, still drew. We sold out Rupp Arena there because this was the local IWA going against the big established Memphis wrestling group. And their top star, Randy Savage, who had been knocking me on TV every week, going against the King.
Do you want to get it?
Yeah, it's pretty decent.
Okay, we were talking about what?
Savage and
Randy
Rupp
Savage.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, we had this big interpromotional battle in the first match, Randy against I, champion versus champion. And we really played it up. Great. It was really done well in the fact that the people knew that these two companies that had been at each other's throats were really coming together for this big match. We had two referees, one of their company's referees, one of our company's referees. I had our promoter in my corner, Eddie Marlin, and Randy had their promoter, his dad, in his corner. and we used Lance Russell, our announcer at ringside, and one of their announcers at ringside. So it was really like a big even head-to-head battle there. And the people in Lexington loved it. We sold out, as I said, Rupp Arena, and went on. And then Randy worked. Then Randy went ahead and worked for our territory for quite a while after that.
What about your memories on Rick Rude?
It's funny. What I remember most about Rick Rude was when he came to work for us there. He had like the best looking valet that I'd ever seen. This girl named Angel, and of course I really enjoyed working with Rick. And he was I guess pretty much basically just starting out there when he came through Memphis, and he had that really good look physically and everything, and Rick did good interviews, and so whenever we got somebody coming through like that that had that look, we would thrust them right into a main event program, usually with me, and so I think it really would help somebody you can't do anything but help somebody when you're as trying to learn as Rick was to be in that pressure situation. There's no substitute for that. To be have that responsibility of being part of the main match that's going to be responsible for drawing the people into the building, having to do the most important interview on television that week, and then having to have the most important match on the card that night. That's that's where it's a make it or break it situation, and Rick came in for us and did real well. We drew some big crowds with Rick. As I said, but the main thing I remember about him was his valet. She was so good looking. And the neatest thing, it was like the first time they got so much heat, and she would do things in the match, and they had so much heat that I think it was the first time ever that I in Memphis gave a pile driver or did a big move to a female. And we talked about it beforehand, and we thought, if I do this, is this going to make me a heel, or is this going to turn the people off? And the two things that I remember about that pile driver was when I stuck her head between my legs and picked her up, I glanced down, and she wasn't wearing any panties. And I held her for a long time before I pile driver. That's the first thing I remember about. That was my favorite pile driver of all time, even better than the Andy Kaufman pile driver. And the second thing I remember about it was when I actually gave her the pile driver. I honestly think that may have been the biggest pop that I ever heard in the Coliseum. Maybe even as big or bigger than when I finally beat Kurt Hennig to win the world title there. It was just, and it may have just seemed that way to me because we were apprehensive about it. We were wondering if the people would be mad at me for pile driving a girl. But it was like, that's what they wanted to see. And the roof came off in. And it was a fun pile driver.
What are your memories of the whole Andy Kaufman feud, since you just touched on it a little bit?
Oh, well, without a doubt, Andy Kaufman is probably the best thing that ever happened to me, the best thing that ever happened to my career. I mean, who would have ever thought that having a little run-in 17 years ago would that people would still be talking about it to this day and making movies about it using one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, Jim Carrey, and me getting to play myself, and it's mind-boggling to think of how many good things that led to, and it was all because Andy, like myself, was a lifelong wrestling fan. From the time he was a little boy growing up, he idolized the bad guy wrestlers, and what it made such an impact on Andy that he actually told me that he was just amazed by the fact that somebody could go on television and intentionally try to make people dislike him, and then that people would still want to come see him. And that made such an impression on Andy that later on, I mean, when he got into show business, that's all he was doing. And a lot of people didn't get it, but Andy was emulating wrestling and wrestlers before he even started doing the wrestling. In his nightclub, and he hated to be called a comedian. That was one of the parts of the movie that was accurate. But in his performances, Andy was intentionally trying to make people dislike him, but he still wanted them to think enough of him that they would come to see him. He wanted to entertain them enough that they would still come to see Andy. He was playing bad guy wrestler, even when he was just being a stand-up comic. And so when he got the opportunity to do the wrestling, it was, I honestly think, like the biggest thrill of Andy's life. And I know for a fact that he even told me if he could have stayed full-time involved with wrestling, he would have given up all of the other forms of show business. That's how much he loved it, and that's how much he enjoyed it. And the movie, one of the things I hated about the movie, to me, it seemed like it implied that the wrestling was bad for Andy's career, and that that once Andy got involved with the wrestling, that his career went downhill, and that they just had things backwards and moved around in the movie, and that's not the case at all. Andy loved the wrestling. His manager George Shapiro loved him wrestling. It was one of the most fun things he ever did, and he was still doing the wrestling in our Memphis area and coming back and on my television show there in Memphis right up until the time that he was diagnosed with cancer. And I was one of the first people that he told, simply because he was doing an interview on my show one Sunday morning and kept coughing during there. I'll never forget, it was right near Thanksgiving, and we had Andy just in another part of the studio. The camera was on me, and then when it would cut to Andy, it made him appear that he was in another location or another part of the studio or whatever, but he was actually right over in the same room. And we were fixing this. We had a big picture of a turkey behind me, and we were going to superimpose Andy's face over the head of this turkey, and he was going to be our big Thanksgiving turkey. And Andy was saying, you know, he was cutting that interview into the microphone. He says, "Let me tell you something, Mr. Lawler. If you if you put my face on that turkey, I promise you, I will sue you. I'll have my lawyers in here tomorrow." And you know, I just thought he had a cold or whatever. And then after the show, he came to me and he said, "I apologize for not being able to get through that interview, but," he said, "I've been diagnosed with lung cancer." And true to like the movie, I thought Andy was joking. I thought he was kidding at first, but it didn't. It only took a couple of minutes for him to convince me that that was the truth. And Andy, I think he lasted about 4 months from the time he was diagnosed till the time he died. But he loved wrestling and was the neatest guy ever. You know, people ask me to this day, was he a nut? Was he weird? And he was not. He was brilliant, and he was so respectful of wrestling, and so respectful. You can ask any of the wrestlers that had the pleasure of meeting Andy. He referred to everybody as Mr. Lawler or whatever your name was, and sir this and yes ma'am, and he just was in awe of wrestling and loved it, and I think Andy certainly helped my career and helped wrestling in general, you know, and I really miss the guy.
What are your memories of Jimmy Hart?
Jimmy Hart. My memories of Jimmy Hart. I had the opportunity to see Jimmy at our TV5 wrestling show. A lot of people didn't. Well, probably nobody did, because the presidential, what was it? I think George Bush was nominating Colin Powell for Secretary of State or something like that. And they broke into our Channel 5 wrestling show that morning, which of course is live, and we had no control over that. But we had Jimmy Hart back on just a month or so ago. He came in and was on Channel 5, and we were going to have our big confrontation after all of these years. And so Jimmy had already come out and had made his little spiel to the crowd, and then he went back, and then I came out and said, "Well, I know, you know, Jimmy Hart is here, and I want to talk to him," and bang, network cut in, and so the show went off. But Jimmy came out. We pretty much entertained the studio audience with our not so much reconciliation, but with our remembrances of how he and I got together. A lot of people may or may not know that I am solely responsible for the Mouth of the South, being in the wrestling business, and I don't regret it at all. Jimmy's a good guy. I've known Jimmy for a number of years. He and I went to the same high school in Memphis. He was like, I think, about 4 or 5 years ahead of me. And in the late '60s, when I was a senior in high school, or junior in high school or whatever. Jimmy had already graduated. He was in a band called the Gentrys, and it was made up of 5 or 6 guys from our high school, Treadwell High School in Memphis. And they would come back and they would play this, of course, like I said, in the late '60s, the time when all of these garage bands were real popular, and the British Invasion and the Beatles were dominating the music scene. Well, Jimmy Hart and the Gentrys were a pretty popular local band there in Memphis, and everybody that went to Treadwell, were their fans simply because we went to the same school that these guys had graduated from, and they actually did a record called "Keep On Dancing," that went to #1 in the nation and knocked the Beatles off the #1 hit song chart. The first time that had happened by anybody from the United States. I mean, a record to knock these British groups off the charts. And so they had a million selling record, and they were like big stars. And I was, a big fan of Jimmy Hart and the Gentrys, but I had not actually met Jimmy. So then this was, like I said, in the late '60s. So then later on, after I got into wrestling, in the the late '70s, or no, I guess it was earlier than like the mid '70s. A friend of mine named Jim Blake, who was like a record producer and an entrepreneur music guy there in Memphis, came to me with the idea. He said, "You know what? We need to capitalize on your popularity here as the top bad guy in Memphis and the top guy in wrestling. We need to go in the studio and make a record." And I said, "Jim, I can't sing. I've never tried to sing." He said, "Don't worry about it. We'll find a song that'll fit you, and you just basically talk your way through it." And he said, "I'll put together the musicians." And one thing Memphis was famous for is its music, and there are a lot of great musicians there in Memphis. And so Jim Blake went about assembling a cast of characters. A guy named Jim Dickinson, who has played with the Rolling Stones and did matter of fact, did pianos and keyboards on a lot of the Rolling Stones sessions. Oh gosh, I can't even begin to name the names, but just a lot of great musicians he put together and had them at the Ardent Recording Studios one night in Memphis, and had me come in to cut this record called Bad News. And when I got there, met all these guys, and Jimmy Hart was there. Jim Blake had hooked up Jimmy Hart, and it was like a big thrill for me to actually get to meet Jimmy Hart, because in high school I said, "Man, I was a big fan of the Gentrys. Hey, you guys had the big record," and of course Jimmy was still he still had the group called the Gentrys, but he was the only original member left, and he had sort of gone along chasing another big hit record, but they really only ever had that one big hit, and then the band broke up, and Jimmy bringing in new members, and was playing in different clubs around Memphis, and just making his living as a local singer in a band. So I think what really happened in that recording session was, this is the case with a lot of musicians, these guys started jamming and playing their music, laying down some tracks here and there. Next thing you know, somebody pulled out a joint, and a lot of these guys started smoking some of that stuff, and I was like, honestly, I was like horrified. I was really scared. It was the first time I'd ever even seen anybody do this. And so I'm over there with Jimmy Hart, and all of these guys are like getting high. and Jimmy and I, that's where we really sort of formed like this bond, because I told him, I said, "Man, I don't really enjoy being around this. It's kind of scary. I had never, and still to this day, never smoked dope, never even tried it, never drank, never even tasted any kind of alcohol, never drank a beer, never smoked a cigarette, never done any kind of drugs." And I was explaining that to Jimmy Hart, and he was the exact same way. Never smoked, never drank, never done any drugs. And so he and I wound up, sitting over there doing our stuff, and all of these other musicians doing their thing. So that's where Jimmy and I became friends, and he started coming to the matches and watching the matches. And then we got the record cut and out, and it got some airplay, and it was not a great record by any means. The music was good, but it still got a little notoriety. And then Jimmy and I went on, and we did some singing together, and made some more records. And actually, I think we wound up putting out like 2 albums and about 7 or 8 single records. And I got a chance to, just being that celebrity opened up a lot of doors, and gave me some opportunities to do things that I certainly would have never gotten to do and have fun doing. Meeting a lot of great musicians, working in Sun recording studios, right where Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash and all of these Jerry Lee Lewis and guys had recorded, and working with Knox Phillips and Sam Phillips and Jerry Phillips, and people that had done recordings on all of these great singers. So Jimmy, as I said, and I were doing some singing together. Of course, I was doing mostly wrestling, and this was, I think, it was probably in like 1977, because Sam Bass had died in 1976, and I was just kind of floundering around without a manager, and I'd try a valet here or a manager there. Couldn't really hit on anybody that clicked, and so I asked Jimmy if he'd like to. He's a charismatic guy, another guy that was never afraid of the microphone and really bubbly and energetic. And I said, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you come to TV, and we'll dress you up and put you out there as my manager?" So it just worked. Jimmy was a natural, and you can look at what he's done. He's been very, very successful, and Jimmy is the master of, and he'll still tell me he told me on the phone just the other day, he said, "You're the one that taught me this. Always tell people what they want to hear." And Jimmy is the master of that, and he's made a great career out of doing that, and he's still around today and doing well. And Jimmy's one of the few guys in the business that I can say is really a real friend of mine.
Since we're talking about managers, let's talk about Jim Cornette. What are your thoughts on Jim Cornette and how you got him started in the business?
Now, I guess, I don't know if I got Jim Cornette started in the business. I do know that Jim Cornette is a guy. Of course, Jim was from Louisville, grew up watching our matches every week there. Our matches were not only in Memphis every week, but the same show that aired on a Saturday in Memphis would air the following Saturday in Louisville, and we would have live matches every Tuesday night in Louisville at Louisville Gardens. And Jimmy, of course, grew up in Louisville, watched the matches, huge fan, and a very, very serious student of the business. I mean, I think Jim watched sort of like I did, probably from more than just a fan standpoint. He would study and commit to memory interviews and things that he heard and things that he liked or things that he saw that he liked or didn't like. And so he started out as the first time I can remember him coming around, he started out as a photographer taking the pictures of wrestlers. And then we let him get up around ringside and do the, photography at the ringside. And I believe, I honestly got to say, I think it was Jerry Jarrett more so than myself, who first gave Jim Cornette the opportunity to actually manage. But I may be wrong. I just may not be remembering that right. But I know, Jerry and he started in our company, and he was just a real, as I said, a real good student of especially my interviews and that sort of thing. And some, it used to sort of, they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And I was flattered in a sense, but then sometimes it was like, he would go a little bit too far using my interviews verbatim, word for word. Now, every line that I would say, he would come back and repeat later on and do, that sort of thing. But he's very charismatic, and has done well, had a good career. I think, though, of course, when he started working for the World Wrestling Federation, and the business changed, so to speak, from what Jim had grown up loving. He didn't like that change, and he'll tell you he didn't like that change. He's a very stubborn individual, and he doesn't think that the wrestling is as good now as it was, and he just he was never one to hide his thoughts, and so he would let it be known at every opportunity that he got to anybody that would listen that he didn't like the current state of wrestling, and I think he was sort of his own worst enemy there in the WWF. That people just kind of got tired of hearing Jim knock the business, and so they found something else for him to do where he wouldn't be around them all the time, where they wouldn't have to listen to that. But now he's got the developmental territory there in Louisville, and I think he really enjoys it because he's getting to. I still think that everybody that comes into this business needs a fundamental, basic background of the way the business sort of used to be, and then that will help them. Have that knowledge as they go on to the way the business is today. And so Jim has the opportunity now to impart that kind of old time wisdom to the new guys that are coming into the WWF.
Since we're also talking about managers, I know it's kind of jumping ahead, but what about Paul Heyman? He came through Memphis.
I think we pretty much helped start Paul. Paul and I never really got along. I broke Paul's jaw one time in Blytheville, Arkansas, and I don't think I did it intentionally. I may have. He certainly thinks I did, and we just, when you're in a pressure situation. When I was booking, you come up with these what you think are great ideas, and you think every idea that you have is going to draw a sellout, and of course, it all depends on how the performers, how the wrestlers play their parts as to how successful these ideas are. And I remember I booked, we had Paul managing, I think Paul was managing Austin Idol and Tommy Rich, and we were pouring all the heat on these guys. And we had, two individuals that did great interviews, and Tommy Rich and Austin Idol. But we were letting Paul do the talking for him. So, we were just funneling the heat onto Paul. And I finally booked, I'll never forget, I booked in Louisville one night this scaffold match where, we built the scaffold way up over the ring, and we were going to all go up there and fight on the scaffold. And so we did the big build up to it. And I told everybody, we're going to work towards the scaffold match. Yeah. It's going to be great. And we did the big build up, and we got there that night, and of course we'd all done the interviews of how we're going to all be up there fighting on this dangerous match. And then, it was like the scaffold's built, we've got a sellout out there, and it's almost bell time. And Paul comes to me and said, I can't climb up on the scaffold. I said, what do you mean you can't climb up on the scaffold? He said, I can't, I'm afraid. And I thought he was ribbing me. And then I found out later, we go out there and he wasn't ribbing. He wouldn't climb up on the scaffold. And it was like it killed the whole match. And I think I got so mad at Paul that I more or less probably always held that against him. It was like I almost, I didn't really have any use for him after that. But he stayed around a little while longer. Then he went on, and of course, the rest is history. Did the ECW thing, and I think he's a really good promoter, really smart promoter in that respect, and to take a business and a company from nothing to the success that he had with ECW without having big financial backing is very, very difficult. And he pulled it off, and was able to do pay-per-views and that sort of thing. So that proves to me that he got a lot going for him upstairs.
Let's talk about Verne Gagne and your relationship with Verne Gagne.
Didn't really ever have a relationship with Verne Gagne. Of course, he was the head of the AWA, and we Jerry and I worked with the NWA, of course, when we were in business for a long time, and we had all of these matches with NWA world champions, the Jack Briscoes, the Terry Funks, the Dory Funks, Harley Races, Flair, all of these guys. And for years, And we felt like we should be maybe given the opportunity to have even a brief. That's all we were basically looking for. Even a brief title change in Memphis, because we used the NWA champion probably as much or more than any other territory did. We always, that was our background, or our longest running angle, so to speak. That was always everything we did in the territory was to build around to be that main person to get the shot at the NWA World Title whenever the champion would come along. And as I said, we went through all of those different champions and could never get them to go along with doing a title change for us. And so we switched over to Verne Gagne and started using the AWA and Nick Bockwinkel as their champion. I had a lot of great matches with Nick Bockwinkel. Talk about somebody easy to work with. That Nick was always he was like the best. A pleasure to work with that guy. You knew you're going to have a long match. A lot of times, I don't know how many 60-minute draws Nick and I wrestled to, but it was like a joy. He was just so easy. And finally, we were able to talk Verne into. I say we. This was mostly Jerry Jarrett's doing. Like I said, I didn't get to be around Verne that much, but Jerry Jarrett was around quite a bit. I talked Verne into switching the title from Curt Hennig to me in 1988, and it was just at a time when, that's when everything was kind of the territory type thing was falling apart. The WWF was just really exploding, and Verne and all of the other people tried to gear up and go national to try to hang with Vince, and nobody had the we didn't have the cable outlet, the monster TV machine that Vince had. So we should have known, and everybody really should have known that you weren't without that cable outlet, you didn't stand a chance. But we all tried anyway. And, that was really, I think, Verne's downfall. I think Verne could probably still be in business today had he not tried to match Vince, move for move. If he had stayed a smaller organization and more regionalized, as we down in Memphis dropped back and became a sort of little mom and pop organization and at least remained viable, Verne probably could have still been around today.
What are your memories on Super Clash 3 and Kerry Von Erich, and what was he like outside the ring? Because we've heard a lot of stories on the Von Erichs.
Once again, I didn't really know any of those guys on a personal basis. I knew Jerry Jarrett came to me and said one time, he said, you want to go down to Texas and more or less take over that territory? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, talking with Fritz Von Erich, and they were kind of struggling down there, and he said, we have the opportunity to go down and do their TV, and pretty much almost like a lease purchase, or buy if the territory starts to come up, buy in and get part ownership of the territory, or buy into the territory. And so I just knew at the time that what it would mean was an every Friday trip to Dallas, at least on Friday, and maybe even more than that. And I just I've always been pretty much a homebody, never liked to travel that much, or try to travel as little as possible. So I sort of declined the offer. So Jerry went down on his own and sort of bought into the world-class operation there and started running it. And still, inevitably, it wound up with me having to come down and work in Dallas a little bit. And that's, that was the first time I was around Kerry. But it was always on just a business relationship, seeing him there at the Sportatorium. Had no idea what his family life was like, or what his personal life was like, or anything. I enjoyed working with Kerry. He was, talk about somebody that, I guess interviews, not fantastic, but just the look and the natural charisma. He could have been a major superstar in this business. just, everybody knows the story of Von Erich. It's just really sad. Um, so many self-inflicted tragedies there on that family. But once again, it's like it's hard for me to comment on people that abuse either alcohol or whatever drugs or anything like that, because I've never ever been involved with them. And also I can't comprehend that state of mind or that way of thinking. But it's obvious that sometimes once these people get involved with this stuff, that it literally takes over their life, and they feel they can't exist without it. And I know the Super Clash was a situation where I'm fixed to go in the ring with Kerry Von Erich, and he was just messed up. I mean, this was right before a big, huge match, and just to tell you how messed up he was, we're getting ready to go out, and to be honest with you, this was a match to supposedly unify the titles. There was of course the world class title, and I was the AWA world champion, and Kerry was the world class world champion, and we were going to have this match to unify the titles. And I don't know how. I really, to this day, don't know what all was going on behind the scenes, but apparently Kerry had been told that, or had been assured that he was going to win the match and become the unified champion. And of course, Verne Gagne didn't want that. He wanted the AWA champion to win the match, which that was me. And so there were a lot of discussions going on right up until match time. I didn't even get to talk to Kerry because he was apparently in-dogging with Verne, and they were trying to come up with some kind of different solution. And we were thinking that, I mean, even though we're live on pay-per-view, we were thinking that this match might not even take place. And then, of course, with Kerry being, a little bit out there at the time, it didn't help at all either. So finally, they came up with what they thought was the solution, and that was that the match would be stopped because of blood. And so literally, I'll bet maybe 5 minutes before we were supposed to go in the ring, Verne called me over, and Kerry was standing there, and his other representative was standing there with him. And of course, Kerry was, his arms, muscles huge and everything. And Verne was saying, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." And I looked down, and on Kerry's finger, he had taped to his finger like this big piece of blade, and it was literally sticking out like almost an inch off his finger, right? This big exposed blade, and he's got it taped to this finger. And he's like standing there like this, and Verne is saying, "All right, we're gonna go out there and have this big match, and you guys are up and down this and that." And Kerry's going, yeah, and he's getting all ready, and he's got this big thing on his finger, and like I said, his muscles real huge, and all of a sudden he's going, yeah, okay, and then he goes, and he reaches over and scratches under his arm, and of course when he did, he sliced his arm open, his bicep right here, a cut about that long, and his muscles are so big that it just split open like that, and blood just started shooting out like a water hose. And we're going, holy mackerel! And so they started try to put a tourniquet on him, and wiping all this blood up, and they got him cleaned up a little bit, and it was just still leaking out. And if you go back and watch the Super Clash tape, you'll see they put his robe on him, and we went out to the ring. And we did the entrance, and as soon as the bell rang, I had to attack Kerry and hit his arm on the turnbuckle and try to make it look like he had sliced his arm open on the turnbuckle there, because it was already bleeding before he ever got in the ring. So it was I thought, I was really worried about what the match was going to be like. I was just scared to death that it was going to be horrible, but in retrospect, when I watch it, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good match. Kerry wound up being, one of the most gruesome sights, just as far as the blood goes, and it was just a bloody mess. And I thought it really turned out well, even though people weren't used to seeing a match, having a match of that magnitude stopped and awarded to somebody. I still thought it worked out well. I thought it was a really good match.
What about the Undertaker? Me and Mark.
You mean like what about him coming through Memphis?
Yeah, as far as him coming through Memphis.
Yeah, it's funny. Mark and I were just talking about that the other day. I reminded him of a match that we had because I found a picture. I was going through some old pictures and I found a picture of Mark standing in the middle of the ring. He's got this real disgusted look on his face. And of course, he's almost 7 feet tall, and he's standing there, and we're pouring. It wasn't actually me or somebody else. We're pouring syrup all over him, and it was a tar and feather match. And I guess he had lost this tar and feather match, and it was like so degrading. I reminded Mark of that, and he went, "Yeah."
Huh.
We did a lot of goofy things down in Memphis, and then we started talking about he and I had a match at Adventure River, a special promotional match at this big water park called Adventure River, right in the middle of summer, like the middle of July. It was about 105 degrees outside, and we did our matches at TV on Saturday morning, and then we went over to Adventure River. We had a ring set up out there, right in front of the big wave pool, and the object was he and I wrestling, and the only way you could win the match was to throw your opponent over the top rope all the way down into the wave pool. And we didn't think about the fact that the ring had been sitting there in this heat of the day, boiling hot sun for like 4 hours, and we got out there and got in the ring and tried to wrestle, and literally it was like wrestling in a skillet or a frying pan. If you took a bump down your back, you shot right back up, and we were laughing sort of in the match because we were each trying to run and jump over it out of the thing into the wave pool. But Mark and I had some really good matches down there, and he, I think Mark will tell you that Memphis was a very valuable training location for him, and of course we all know what he's gone on to do.
What are your thoughts on Sid Vicious, and was he difficult to work with at all?
I never found Sid difficult to work with. Sid was a lot like me in the fact that I helped train and work out with Sid some of his first matches over there. We used him as humongous, put the gimmick on him from the movie The Road Warrior, and he just had that. He always had that great look, and of course the physical stature and all that kind of stuff. But Sid was a lot like me in the fact that Sid doesn't like to travel. Sid likes to be at home, and Sid likes to play softball just like I do. And I can honestly tell you that if given the choice of wrestling on the main event in Madison Square Garden, or playing a softball game, wrestling in front of 18,000 people, or playing a softball game in front of nothing but with 20 of your friends, if you had the choice between the two, probably Sid and I would both choose the softball game. And a lot of people, think you're crazy or get a bad impression of you from that. But I think it's just a difference in priorities. And a lot of people give Sid the label of being difficult to work with simply because of things like that, maybe not showing up or something, so because he thought something else was more important or that sort of thing. But Sid was at least not for me, never difficult to work with in the ring. I thought we had a lot of good matches.
What are your memories of when Steve Austin came through the territory?
That's another thing. Steve and I were talking about this the other day. I really don't remember Steve being in Memphis, although he assured me that he was. And I don't even know. He says he thinks he and I worked a couple of matches there, but I know probably what the situation was. When he came through, he was either not ready or they didn't have him in line to be in like a main event program. I'm sure I was working with somebody else, and Steve worked some, some what we call underneath matches or that sort of thing. And I don't guess he was there very long. I remember Steve more from when I was going down to Texas to work with Kerry Von Erich. I remember Steve being on those cards with the long blonde hair and stunning Steve Austin and his valet and all of that. That's my best memories of Steve down there.
What happened with the working agreement between Georgia Championship Wrestling and Ole Anderson? I remember it lasted for about 6 weeks when Gordon Solie came into the studio and did commentary with Lance, and some of the Georgia guys appeared on your TV. I think it was Ron Garvin, the Irwins came up for a little bit of time. Was there a style conflict that caused an initial breakup between the two promotions, or?
You would probably be better answering that than me. I remember I remember Gordon coming up and working with us some. And I also remember, I guess at the same time, I remember me going down to Atlanta, and I was just fixing to work we did the big build-up for a program with Roddy Piper.
Right.
Roddy Piper and myself. And then...
I think he left the territory, Piper left.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
I really have no idea why that association ended, but you're right, it did, and I don't know why. Probably just that was a situation where Jerry Jarrett was running the business end of it then, and probably just a situation where Jerry. Do you remember what year that was?
I don't know. It was like 83 or 84 maybe.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I know that in like 1976, Jerry went down to help promote in Atlanta for Jim Barnett and asked me to come down. I actually went down and bought a condominium in Atlanta and wound up staying down there for a little bit, and then that didn't pan out. We came back in about a year or so. So I really don't remember what happened on that.
Okay, now a lot of TV shows, I guess, that you were on in the 80s in Memphis, there would be like a lot of knocks at McMahon and WWF and stuff like that. And of course, everyone knows that you sued the World Wrestling Federation over Harley Race and the King. What actually led you guys to working together and you coming in to work for Vince?
Well, of course, as I said, we down in Memphis, our little mom and pop territory was one of the last remaining vestiges. We felt like we were the Alamo. We were the lone holdout of all of these. At one time, I think there were like 32 promotional companies around the United States. And when Vince, of course, went nationwide, and most of these stars of these little small territories went to work for Vince, and then of course when Vince came back and ran the shows in that territory with their former stars, it just blew the local promotions right out the window, and we were one of the last remaining territories, and I still say the reason that we were able to hold out was because. I was like one of the only main featured stars from a territory that didn't go to work for Vince. Without a doubt, had I gone to work for Vince at that time, and then the WWF come back to work in Memphis with me, with them, it would have blown out what was left of the Memphis promotion. But because I had an ownership stake in the company, my main concern was our company. And that was the difference in like the other top wrestlers in these other territories. They weren't owners; they were just top talent, and so it was meant more money for them to go to work for Vince, and you can't blame them. If I had gone to work for Vince, it meant me losing my own company. So Jerry and I were fiercely protective of that. And when Vince came in and tried to promote what we felt like were our cities and had always been in our territory, and especially using a guy like Harley Race and calling him the King, all of a sudden their advertising just said, WWF Wrestling featuring the King. I felt like this was confusing the public at the least, and so I filed a lawsuit against Vince, and actually, I don't know. It never really went to court, I don't think, but I won a little bit of a battle in the fact that they actually held up the gate receipts from a show and that sort of thing, and then I guess they agreed to stop using that the king of wrestling term in our territory and that sort of thing. But Vince, he will still bring it up every now and then on occasion. Yeah, there's the king. He sued us one time, But Vince is from a wrestling family, and he knows exactly what that was all about. He knows why, and I think actually respects me for that, because he knows I was just, we were trying to protect our company, and he was trying to do what he thought was best for his company, and it was just that was just one of those business things that there was nothing personal about it. Yeah, we said a lot of bad things about the WWF because we were afraid of them. We knew that they had put almost everybody else out of business, and we felt like we were next on the list. So we were doing everything in our power and trying to convince our fans to remain loyal to us and not get swept away with this WWF craze. So I guess in 1993, we were still hanging on, and the thing with Vince was basically up until that time, you pretty much had to sign an exclusive contract with Vince McMahon or with the WWF. You went to work for Vince, and that was it. You worked for the WWF and pretty much nobody else. And somehow we came to an agreement to where Vince would allow me to work for them and still work in Memphis, which was pretty unique at that time. And then that made everything fine. I think Vince realized. I think he was probably thinking on a more long range basis than we were. I think Vince realized that it's to his benefit to keep small territories like this alive and around, because there's got to be some place for his next superstars to come from. You can't just take somebody off the street and start them in the World Wrestling Federation on Monday Night Raw or on SmackDown. You need places for these guys to learn the ropes and become somewhat stars before they're brought up to the WWF. So that's how our working relationship formed, and it's really worked out great. And the fact that I've been able to do everything that I've needed to do in the WWF, but still been able to do everything we needed down in our Memphis territory to keep that alive and be able to wrestle down there and still work with the young talent and all that sort of thing. So it's it really it became one of those unselfish things where Vince said, okay, I don't have to have this guy exclusively, and it worked out good for everybody.
When you first got in the locker room, was there heat with you and anybody, or what were your initial impressions of Vince himself?
In the WWF locker room?
Right.
Yeah, excuse me. I think there was obviously some heat with somebody, because when I first got to the WWF, I think like the first week up there, somebody took a crap in my crown. And so I figured I must have heat with somebody. But what that's sort of one of those heat and rib combinations. Right. But what you got to understand is, as I said, this business is, there's a lot of guys, these guys, but they're not really your friends. You will be friendly towards them and that sort of thing. But when you're in a position of being the booker or the owner of a territory, you're just going to naturally get heat with guys. I mean, everybody that's in this business thinks that they should be, I can assure you, everybody that's in this business today thinks that they should be the main event at the upcoming WrestleMania. They think that they're that good. And that's not a bad thing, because if you don't believe in yourself, and if you don't have the confidence in your own ability, then you're not going to make it anyway. So in everybody's mind, they believe that they're the best, and they should be on the top in the main events every night. And if you don't agree with them, then you're going to have heat with them. I mean, that's the way a lot of people think, and that's just a fact of life. So over the years, in the 20 years that Jerry Jarrett and I had the Memphis territory, and in all of the years that I booked or made payoffs or owned that territory, a lot of the guys resented either the way they were used. They didn't feel like they were put in the main event, or you weren't used right, or they weren't paid enough. And so there was just that natural heat with a lot of guys. And that's just, I knew that, and it's a fact of life. And so then all of a sudden, when I came to work with the WWF, it was like, oh, well, here's the king, here's Lawler. Now he's just one of the boys. He's just like us. He's not the boss here. he's not the owner here. And so, there was as I said, a couple of ribs like that. But I immediately went to Vince and I said, if this is the way it's going to be, then I just don't need to be here. And he was cool, and I'm sure inwardly he probably thought it was funny and everything, but he was enough of a professional that he told everybody that hey, we want Jerry here, and we're going to all work together, and we're going to all be professionals. And so from that time on, everything's been cool. And Vince, I can honestly say that I have never had a crossword with Vince. He has been always gone out of his way to be as nice as he could to me, done things for me that go way beyond the call of duty, so to speak. And I can't say a bad word about Vince McMahon.
How influential were you to your son Brian Christopher's career in getting him started in the business, or was when he came to you and said he wanted to be in the business, did you try to talk him out of it, or did you say,
that's one of those things where you really should be able to remember that conversation. I mean, I wish I could say that I remember Brian coming to me and say, hey, I want to be in the business. But it was one of those things that I don't even know if we ever had that conversation. My first wife and Brian's mother divorced when Brian was, I think, like 7 years old. And first of all, the wrestling business is a really, really tough business to be married in. That's why I've always, one of the first things when young guys come up to me and say they want to be a wrestler or whatever, one of the first things I say, are you married? Because I would really try to discourage any young guy that's got a wife and a family that isn't in this business, that wants to get in this business. It's just really, really difficult, hard on a marriage. It's a different kind of life. You're on the road. You're away from home a lot. You're exposed to all sorts of temptations. People see you as all this big movie star or TV star, or big wrestling star, and fact of life is there are girls out there that will literally throw themselves at you. So there's a lot of temptation, a lot of opportunity to not be a good husband or father in this business. And I'll admit that I was not a good husband or father. And we wound up getting a divorce when Brian was 7, and he and his mother lived in Memphis, and I for years lived in Nashville, because that's where our home base was for our company. And so I didn't, I didn't see Brian a lot, and I was not necessarily there as the father figure that most people are used to having. And that's why Brian and I's relationship today is literally different from, sadly, it's not like a father-son relationship at all. It's like two friends or wrestlers, because I wasn't there as he was growing up, and really the most time I've actually spent with Brian has been once he got into the business as a wrestler, and knowing him, as like one of the boys. And so he started, he did a lot like I did. He and a lot of his friends in high school started wrestling in their backyard. They would put on shows in their garage, and they were a little more high tech than I was at the time. They had video cameras and filmed themselves and build rings and all of this sort of stuff. And I don't know if he first came to me or if he went to Jerry Jarrett and said that he wanted to wrestle. And I actually think it was Jerry Jarrett, but I didn't try to discourage him. I don't know if I really thought that he would be successful.
Are you surprised at it now today?
Well, no, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I think, I know he's done really well. And a lot of people, they say, well, why don't you acknowledge Brian as your son or that sort of thing? And I guess that goes back to watching Buddy Fuller and Robert Fuller and the Welches and that sort of thing. I felt that if Brian and also it had a big part of watching the George Goulas and that sort of that relationship and that effect that George Goulas had on his father's business. I always felt that if Brian had come along and went out there and started wrestling as Brian Lawler, that it would be like saddling him with the old albatross around your neck. He would have had a burden that he really didn't deserve. And the fact that it's almost like when you see the coach's son being the quarterback on a football team, it's just human nature to wonder, now is he there and playing there because he's good, or is he there because he's the coach's son? And I didn't want people to think, well, here's Brian Lawler out there. He's only there because of his old man, and I wanted him to also to be able to if he's going to make it on his own and not have to try to fill anybody's shoes, not have to be in anybody's shadow, and plus I didn't feel that it was right. I didn't deserve to get to take the credit if he was good, because I really I wasn't there when he was growing up to have that relationship, to be able to say, look what I did, look at what I produced, and look what I made here. I mean, what Brian has done, he's done on his own, and I'm proud of him for that, and he should be proud of himself, because it wasn't, and it may be bad to say, but it wasn't because of anything that I helped him do. He's done it on his own.
What are your memories of your feud with Bret Hart and the Hart family?
I think that I certainly enjoyed working with Bret. There's still, I think, still the biggest payoff I've ever gotten in the wrestling business was the match that we had at SummerSlam in like '95, Bret and I. So I thank Bret for that. That was really great, and I thought we had a natural chemistry there that worked out really well. I really enjoyed doing the build up for the Kiss My Foot matches, and there was just a natural chemistry, not only with Bret but with this whole family that led to, I hope it helped Bret and didn't hurt anybody, but it certainly helped me and my evolving into a major player in the WWF by the first time that anybody ever insulted somebody like Bret's parents. It was just such a natural talking about how old they were and that sort of thing. And Stu and Helen were so great to go along with all of that was a big help for me. And Bret was always easy to work with. I mean, you knew you were going to have a good match if you worked with Bret Hart. He was so over with the fans that you could absolutely do anything out there with Bret, and it was going to be good.
How much power did the Clique have? You knew Shawn Michaels from when he was in Memphis, and Scott Hall was down in the territory as well. And, of course, Kevin Nash, I don't know if I don't think he ever went through the Memphis territory. He started out in WCW. So how much power did the Clique have? And did you see it?
I saw it. Everybody saw it that was in the WWF at that time, and I think they had a lot of power. But that's something that it almost inevitably happens. There's sort of a little clique right now, and there was always a little clique in our Tennessee territory. It's like whoever is the top talent, the top wrestler that the promoter has to deal with the most when he's in this main event program. It just happens. There's a relationship formed between those those individuals, and they garner a certain amount of power. When you basically have the promoter's ear if you're in that position. And Vince, I got to give Vince credit for one thing. Vince is he opens himself up, and sometimes maybe to his own detriment, which was what it was in that case, maybe with the Clique. But Vince is great at wanting input from the wrestlers. And of course, when you got the guys that are in the main event, if they come to Vince with a suggestion, I'd say 99 times out of 100, Vince will let them do what they want to do. And so with that comes a feeling of power to those guys, and with that comes the the appearance of power for those guys to the other wrestlers. And sometimes it can get overwhelming, and I think in that point a little bit out of hand. But it's one of those human nature things where everybody that's not in the clique or will knock it and say, man, I would never, that sucks. I would never let something like that happen, or I would never be involved with that. But if the shoe were on the other foot, if that person had the opportunity to have that power, they would almost always take it. And the old saying about, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's just one of those things. We're all human, and that's, I think, one of our weaknesses. When we get that power, we want to see how much power we have and what we can do with it.
Do you think Vince made the right decision at Survivor Series? And also, we did an interview that you saw with Sean, and he said he was not in on it, and Bret claims he was in on it. What is your view on the whole situation?
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know if I to this day don't know who was in on it, or if there was an in on it. I wouldn't be surprised if Vince and Bret were in on it, or if there wasn't it. I don't even know. Right. I was there and calling the match, and I just try to think back on different reactions and facial expressions and what took place after the match, and it all looked a little funny to me.
Right.
I mean, even the part of Bret hitting Vince afterwards. Hey, and you know what? If it was all the work, it was great. It was up there with maybe past the me and Andy Kaufman thing from, and if it wasn't, then who can say? If it wasn't a work, then I know that Vince did what he thought he had to do, and he's the owner of the company. Anytime the owner of the company does what he thinks he has to do for the betterment of the company, how can you say that's wrong? I mean,
right.
This company.
Do you think Scott Hall and Kevin Nash did more to hurt WCW, or did they do more to help it?
I don't think that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were stars and big superstars because the WWF made them superstars. And what helped the WCW was the fact that it didn't matter that it was Scott Hall or Kevin Nash. It could have been, as you saw, it could have been Bret Hart or Randy Savage or whoever. But what happened was it was the top WWF stars all of a sudden showing up in WCW and appearing to still work for the WWF. It was like me and Randy Savage, the two companies having a big battle, a conflict. It's what the people have been wanting to see forever, and the WCW was able to capitalize on that feeling of the fans, and they were sucked into the belief that this was a promotional war that they'd been waiting to see, like I said, forever. So it didn't matter that it was Scott Hall or Kevin Nash. It could have been any of the top. It just they happened to be two of the top WWF superstars that bolted. It could have been anybody over there that showed up at WCW, and it could have worked the same way in reverse. But I don't think that those guys necessarily personally did anything to help or hurt. I think that what helped was the fact that the people thought it was a real promotional war about to take place, and what hurt was the fact that they finally realized that it wasn't. And my honest opinion in the difference in the WWF and the WCW is that Vince and the WWF, and I think because of the wrestling knowledge and background, is able to create and make new talent. And the WCW, that's their worst attribute. I mean, I think that they have proven that they are not able to create and build new talent. And so what happened was they rode that horse of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall until it was dead, and they weren't creating any new talent in the meantime, and they weren't able to build these guys back up once they were dead. And to me, that's what happened to WCW.
What do you think is going to happen now that Bischoff is in charge over there? Do you think it's going to be the same old song and dance in a year from now?
I don't think it'll be the same old song and dance a year from now, because I don't think that these people that Eric Bischoff had brought in have that deep of pockets. I don't think that they could last a year at losing $60 to $70 million. They're going to have to change something. They're going to have to do something about the big salaries, and they're going to have to improve their product. Is Eric Bischoff capable of that? I don't know. A lot of people say that Eric Bischoff was one of the big reasons of the downfall to begin with. It remains to be seen. I know that I've watched a couple of their shows since Eric Bischoff and the new owners have taken over, and I don't see any difference whatsoever. I think they got a huge hill to climb, and I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. But I do know that nobody has the money that AOL and Time Warner has, and if they were ready to dump WCW, I think this new company is not going to be able to fund it for nearly as long as AOL Time Warner did.
Your thoughts on Vince Russo? And do you think when he went over to WCW, he was exposed for not being the genius that he claimed he was?
Without a doubt. Vince Russo, I certainly don't ever look at him as being a genius, and I don't dislike Vince Russo. I didn't get to be around him that much when he was up there. I do remember when he was just a writer for the WWF magazine, and then all of a sudden he would start writing for the shows. I think Vince Russo had some ideas that were certainly successful. Some ideas that I like and some ideas that I agree with. In the fact that he certainly was he was an advocate of the old adage that sex sells, and I couldn't agree more. I think that Vince Russo brought that aspect to the WWF shows, and it scared a lot of people, and it raised a lot of eyebrows, and it turned a lot of people off. But it brought more attention, and it turned more people on than it turned off. And that was the fact of all of the women in the WWF, the beautiful girls, the scantily clad women, as we like to call them, and basically the TNA aspect. And males 18 to 34, I don't care what you say, that's what they want to see. That was something he did right. And that you got to also credit Vince McMahon for saying, hey, we'll try it. This is something totally opposite of what I've been brought up to believe in.
Do you think that Vince, not to cut you off, took a lot of his ideas from Paul Heyman and ECW and ran with it into a bigger level?
Vince Russo, you mean?
No, Vince McMahon.
Oh.
Also,
I don't know if he took a lot of them. He certainly took some of them. Vince once told me that, and this is the way you will, if you ever get to know Vince McMahon, you realize Vince is like he's like a big sponge. I mean, he is out there ready to soak up any idea or any suggestion or anything that he thinks is good, and he'll use it. And that's the way you're successful. If you're smart enough to use the ones that are good and throw out, and not use the ones that are bad. That's good business. And getting back to what I was saying about the girls in wrestling, Vince McMahon was was ballsy enough to say, okay, we're going to take this risk, and it worked. It paid off. Some of the other things that Vince Russo brought in that worked to a degree, but then got overused, was like the language. He was like, all of a sudden, Vince Russo, I liken him to, like, it was the shock jock syndrome, like Howard Stern and that sort of thing. It's shocking, and it will make people tune in just about, people are talking about, did you hear what Steve Austin said? I mean, he called Vince McMahon a son of a bitch right on television. And so you're kidding. So they tune in, they see that. But then all of a sudden, when Steve Austin goes out and says, Vince McMahon, you're a son of a bitch, and then Jeff Jarrett comes out and called somebody a son of a bitch, and then the next guy comes out and The Rock says you're a son of a bitch, then it gets, it's overkill. And I think that's what happened. I think Vince Russo didn't know when to stop on things. He just kept going and going. Now that he's gone and he tried all of that down in WCW, it's already been seen. It's already been done. It's a rerun. And that, in a sense, yes, exposes him for the fact that he might have been a one-trick pony. He had those couple of things that worked, but was he able to follow them up? Was he able to come up with anything else that worked? No. In looking back at what's happened to the WWF since Vince Russo left, one of the things I agree with, one of the things I don't agree with, but I guess it's just their way of thinking. I think they pull back on the language. They try to cut some of that down, tone it down. I agree with that. You don't need everybody doing all this cussing and all that kind of stuff. One person doing it makes it special, makes it stand out, makes it shocking. Everybody doing it is overkill. The other thing they've done with the women, I think, and I think this is my own personal opinion, I think this is wrong, is they've tried to now funnel the women into women wrestling. They're still on the shows, but they're women wrestlers now. And I think one of the reasons for my success as a character is because I'm really pretty much the way that I talk out there. I love women. I love beautiful women. I like to look at them. Puppies, all of this kind of stuff. That's really me. That's really my character. I think it is really sexy to see a girl in lingerie or bikini or scantily clad. She's got a great body, great face. That, to me, just to get to see a girl walking out to the ring like that is a big turn on for me. To see a girl get in the ring and wrestle is a turn off. I don't think it's sexy. I think it's to me, it's just like, it just kills it. And I think, though, the thinking that the WWF is doing now is, we still got the women on the show, we'll just have them wrestle. And, I think we're losing, I know when we go to these shows and we sit there and JR and Michael Cole and I are sitting there during the commercial breaks, you hear 18,000 people just for no reason start a Puppies chant. When they're sitting there during a commercial break with nothing to do, and the biggest chant that starts up is Puppies, Puppies, that's what they want to see. That's what we gave them. That's what we teased them with. And now we're pulling back from that. That's something personally that I don't agree with. That I think Vince Russo was right on with.
Where do you see the business in the next 5 years?
I think that, always the business in the past has been cyclable, up and down, up and down. This has probably been the longest sustained up period. And I really think that they may have found that magical thing that we were always looking for. We always talk about, boy, when we got it up there, how can we just keep it up here? They may have found the way to do that. And when I try to look back and find out what is that magical thing, I think that the WWF has allowed people and forced people, really, If you remember back when our little catchphrase was WWF, get it? I think we finally made everybody get it. They know it's sports entertainment. You know, they know these guys aren't out there killing each other, but they know that they are entertainers, and they know that they are giving you the best show in town. And as long as the writing stays fresh, as long as the the athletes, the wrestlers go out there and bust their butts the way they are doing, I think it can stay 5 years from now, be bigger and better than it is now. There's no reason for somebody to let's look at soap operas on television. How long have they been on television? 50 years. I mean, every weekend and tons of them all day, every day on all the networks. And that's because there's no reason to tune out. I mean, once you get involved, and once you start picking up on whatever's going on in this particular soap opera that you're watching, the people that are running that have to then do something to turn the fans off, to make them turn away. And I think the WWF could be smart enough not to do that. I think, like with the emergence of the XFL, is going to be a huge. I think people, even I, didn't realize. I'll be honest and tell you that I had some negative thoughts about the XFL and worried that it wasn't going to really make it. But last week when I went to Las Vegas and sat and called 2 scrimmage games and saw what they have done in such a short time, I honestly think it's going to blow people away. I think it's going to be huge, and that is going to have a snowball effect. That the XFL being big is going to just put more attention on the WWF, make the stock go up. I think that in 5 years it can be bigger and better than it is now.
What was the most memorable angle that you ever booked or were involved in?
Well, once again, I have to go back to Andy Kaufman. Without a doubt, that's the most memorable thing that just fell right into my hands, and it almost booked itself. And Andy was so great to work with. And like I said, 17 years later, they're making movies about it and still talking about that. Had to be, for me personally, the most memorable angle I've ever been involved with.
I never asked you about Jeff Jarrett. You mentioned him a little bit before. What are your thoughts on Jeff Jarrett? And do you think his character these days have gotten a little bit stale with the guitar?
Well, let me just let's see what did his own dad, Jerry Jarrett. I talked with Jerry not too long ago, and I think he was saying now Jerry, he won't mince any words. He'll tell you what he thinks. He was talking with some of the people. This was before the sale of WCW went through, and Jerry was actually talking with the Time Warner people about the possibility of coming in and helping run the company and trying to get a turnaround, or either putting together a group of financial people and buying the company himself. And apparently one of the big shots down there asked Jerry Jarrett, he said, what would you, or who would you fire, who could you fire without it really hurting the company? They were talking about getting rid of some of the big salaries. He said, who could you fire without it really hurting the company? And then the guy said, other than your son, of course. And Jerry said, hell, my son Jeff could be the first to go. He said, you can drag anybody off the street and tell them to teach them how to say slap nuts and hit somebody over the head with a guitar. And he said, that's all he's become down there. And I think he hit the nail right on the head. That is what they've let Jeff become. And Jeff is a pretty talented kid, and he's capable of a lot more than that. And what happens is you get in one of those ruts where you think that's working, and it may work for a while, but then what you need about in this business, you need to be able to change, and you need to people's attention spans are so short these days. You need to change constantly, and my own opinion is Jeff needs to change that slap nuts gimmick.
Huh. In Memphis, what angle did you book that drew the most money? Or you had the most longevity out of it, where it lasted for 11-week run or something like that?
Oh gosh, Well, once again, the Andy Kaufman thing. We had a big run with Andy. A lot of people think that Andy and I just had like one match. Man, that wasn't the case at all. Andy loved it so much. After we had that big match, then we had just a natural. We had the natural angle. We had the match where Andy went to the hospital, laid in a Memphis hospital in traction for 3 days, and then of course went off back to Hollywood for a while. Started sending in these interviews saying, as soon as I get well, I'm going to come back and I'm going to find somebody that is going to pile drive Lawler and put him out of commission just like he did me. And so, boom, we went right into almost this bounty situation where Andy would come back and he united with Jimmy Hart, and they went on this this revenge seeking thing. And we were able to bring in just guys, just all sorts of talent. We brought Jesse Ventura in, we brought Ken Patera in. We were able to bring in all of these guys, and they immediately had the heat transferred to them right off of Andy, and we were drawing with everybody every week, and Andy would be there in their corner, and then we'd have working the tag matches, and gosh, I bet Andy and I wrestled. I bet we wrestled 30 or 40 times there in Memphis.
We could probably sit here for another 3 hours and talk about like Jesse Ventura and Stan Hansen, Bruce Brody, and you worked Japan, and we could probably do another whole shoot interview on that. But in closing, do you have anything you want to say to your fans out there?
Well, thanks for one thing. It's great to know that fans are just great things to have. It's one of the experiences that I wish everybody could feel, could know what it's like to have somebody come up and want your autograph, and to have a little kid come up and say, "I got your picture on my wall," or to log onto your computer and have 700 or 800 emails from people in Ireland or people in Australia that you've never heard of in your life saying, "King, you and J.R. Rock, you're the greatest." It's just really so special. And then to get a letter the other day from somebody just a fan in Louisville, Kentucky, saying, "I just saw your email address and I just wanted to write you and thank you for all the years of enjoyment that you provided me as a wrestling fan." And so, that's what I hope I can say, that when I say thanks to the fans out there, I hope that they realize that, and I hope that they feel that I have provided them with some fun and some entertainment over the years, because certainly that's what I was in this business to do, and that's what I've loved doing. I feel
no regrets.
No regrets at all. I feel I'm like the most fortunate person in the world, in the fact that I've had a 30-year career, made a great living, made big money, had a wonderful life, and I feel like I've never really had to get a job. I've done something that I would have literally, I can remember, when that Jerry Vickers took me over to that promoter in West Memphis, Arkansas, I would have reached in my pocket and paid him whatever he would have asked to let me wrestle. And I've literally always felt that way throughout my career. I'm getting to do and getting paid to do something that I would actually pay them to let me do. And, unfortunately, most people have to get up every morning and go to work at a job where they don't really particularly like, just to make a living and make ends meet. And as I said, I've been able to do something that I love, that I would have done for nothing or paid to do, and made a great living at it because of the fans out there. So like I said, I just like to say thanks to everybody that has ever watched or enjoyed one of my matches or my commentary.
In closing, I'd definitely like to say thank you, and it's been an extreme pleasure. And thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you.
TitleMatchNetwork.com